Hey there, story lovers. This is Gringotts Hub, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Harry used the Peverell-Merlin ring to revoke every Hogwarts teacher's license to teach magic? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Ring in the Rubble. The detention had been Umbridge's idea, naturally. Harry hadn't even done anything worth punishing this time, or nothing beyond existing in her presence with an expression she found insufficiently reverent. She'd caught him in the corridor after Defense Against the Dark Arts, noted that his essay on the regulated application of defensive charms had used the phrase combat situation twice without the required ministry-approved qualifier of hypothetical, and assigned him 4 hours in the lower dungeons cataloging damaged school property. Filch will give you the list, she'd said, smiling her toad smile. Do try not to break anything else, dear. So here Harry was, alone in the sub-basement corridor at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, holding a lantern and a clipboard, writing down things like cracked flagstone, 4 inches, eastern wall, pillar 3 and iron sconce, bent, south corridor junction, while somewhere above him 1,000 students ate dinner and did homework and lived their actual lives. He wasn't angry about it. That was the strange thing. He'd moved past the kind of anger that spiked and burned. What he felt now was something quieter and more durable, like an ember that had been glowing for months and had simply decided it would never go out. He turned left at the junction where the flagstones sloped downward, following Filch's cramped handwriting on the list, Sub-Basement B, Post-Incident Structural Damage, items 34 through 67, and stopped. The door at the end of the corridor was open. It shouldn't have been. Harry had been down this way twice before during his first year, and both times the door had been sealed with 3 separate locking charms and a rusted padlock the size of his fist. Now it hung open 2 inches, just enough for the damp air behind it to breathe against the corridor's cold, and the lantern flame leaned toward it like it was curious. Harry stood still for a moment. Then he pushed the door open with his foot, keeping his wand ready. Beyond it was a staircase. It went down at a steep angle, cut from the bedrock of the cliff Hogwarts stood on rather than built from the castle's foundation stones. These stairs were older than the rest of the sub-basement by the look of them. The walls were rough and dark with age, the kind of dark that soaks into stone over centuries and stops being a color and becomes a quality. The lantern threw orange light down maybe 15 steps before the angle swallowed it. Harry went down. He wasn't sure why, exactly. Hermione would have said it was reckless. Ron would have said it was completely predictable. Neither of them was here, and Harry had long since stopped needing to explain himself to people who weren't in the room. The stairs bottomed out into a chamber about 30 feet across, low-ceilinged, with walls that curved inward at the top like the inside of a skull. It smelled like the Chamber of Secrets, that same specific combination of standing water, cold stone, and something older than both, something that had no name in English but that Harry's body recognized and filed under ancient. The floor was dry. In the center of the chamber was a stone table, waist-high, roughly square, with no markings on any of the sides Harry could see. On the table was a ring. It wasn't dramatic looking, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been. No glowing stones, no elaborate setting, no sense of dark energy pulsing from it. It was a plain band of black metal, narrow, the kind of ring you might see on an old man's finger and not look twice at. There was a triangle engraved on the flat upper surface, small, precise, with a circle inside it and a vertical line bisecting both, and Harry's chest went very still when he recognized it. The Deathly Hallows symbol. He'd seen it in the Tales of Beedle the Bard last year, scrawled in the margin of Hermione's copy in Dumbledore's handwriting. He'd spent 3 weeks trying not to think too hard about what it meant. He set the lantern on the edge of the table. The ring sat in the exact center of the stone surface, not placed there so much as arrived, the way things that have been in one spot for a very long time stop looking like they were put there and start looking like they grew. Harry picked it up. It was cold, not the passive cold of metal left in a cold room, but a deeper cold, the kind that seemed to have an opinion about being touched. He turned it over once in his fingers. The engraving on the flat surface was sharper up close than it had looked from a distance, the lines clean despite however long the thing had been sitting in this chamber. On the inside of the band there were words, tiny and precise, in a language that was almost Latin but not quite. Harry had enough Latin from his charms reading to catch two words, pactum and nomen. Compact. And name. He held the ring over his right index finger. The ember in his chest pulsed once, like a heartbeat that had been waiting for a cue. He slid it on. It fit perfectly, which was the first impossible thing, because the ring had looked too small even before he tried it. It settled onto his finger with the feeling of something clicking into place, not metaphorically, not like a switch being thrown somewhere inside him, but actually, physically, a small firm click that he felt in the bone of his finger and up through his hand and into his wrist before it stopped. Then the room changed. Not visibly, the walls didn't move, the ceiling didn't shift, the lantern flame didn't even flicker. But Harry's perception of the room changed, radically and all at once, the way your understanding of a sentence changes when you finally find the word you were missing. The chamber wasn't storage. It wasn't a forgotten room or an architectural accident. It was a seat. Something about the geometry of the curved walls and the center table and the angle of the stairs was deliberate, was designed to focus something, to hold something concentrated in this exact spot, waiting. Waiting for someone whose finger the ring fit. Words came into Harry's mind. Not spoken, not heard exactly, more like remembered, the way you remember something you learned very young, the knowledge sitting in the back of your brain below the level of language and then surfacing suddenly when the right context arrives. The words arranged themselves into understanding without fanfare, the Peverell Compact. Established in the year 963 by Ignotus Peverell and the sorcerer Merlin Ambrosius, under the authority of magical Britain's founding covenant. The compact establishes the terms under which magic may be taught to the young, the rights, the responsibilities, and the conditions of revocation. To the heir of the Peverell name falls the ring and the authority of the compact. To the ring-bearer alone belongs the power to grant and to revoke. Harry stood very still in the middle of the ancient chamber and breathed slowly. Then he picked up his lantern, climbed the stairs, went back into the corridor, and continued cataloguing the damaged school property. He wrote down cracked flagstone, 4 inches, an iron sconce, bent and everything else on Filch's list with the same steady hand he'd started with, because whatever had just happened, it wasn't going to be useful to panic about it, and Filch would notice if the list came back unfinished. He finished at 9:15, returned the clipboard, and walked back up to Gryffindor Tower. He didn't tell anyone that night. The common room was loud when he got back. Fred and George had apparently convinced a first year to test an experimental canary cream, and there were yellow feathers drifting through the air and settling on people's homework while the first year, now fully restored and laughing harder than anyone, demanded a second one. Ron was on the sofa with a gobstone set, arguing with Seamus about something that seemed to involve the Welsh national Quidditch team and a disputed foul from 1987. Hermione was at the table nearest the window with 4 books open simultaneously, which was her natural state. Harry sat down next to her, which she acknowledged by turning a page without looking up. How was detention? Educational, Harry said. That made her look up. She had very good instincts about when Harry was using understatement to describe something significant. They'd been friends long enough that the censor for it was basically automatic. What happened? Nothing tonight, Harry said. I need to spend some time in the library tomorrow. Can you get me into the restricted section? I can't just get you in, you have 6 standing permissions from 6 different teachers, Hermione. One of them has to cover pre-Hogwarts magical law. She opened her mouth, considered this, and closed it again. Flitwick's permission covers pre-12th century magical theory. That would technically include historical legal documents. Great. Harry. She turned in her chair to face him properly. What did you find? He turned the ring once on his finger, which he'd been doing unconsciously since he put it on, just once, the way you check that a key is still in your pocket. Something old, he said. I need to know what it actually is before I say anything else. Hermione's eyes dropped to his hand for a second, she noticed everything, and then came back up to his face. She looked like she had approximately 40 questions and was running rapid triage on them to determine which was most urgent. "You put it on," she said. "Whatever it is. It fit." "Harry, you can't just, it fit, Hermione." He said it simply, without defensiveness, and something in the steadiness of it stopped her next sentence before it started. "Like it was made for me. Not found something, not picked up something. It fit the way your wand fits. You know how that feels." She was quiet for a moment, watching him. Feathers drifted past between them. "Library tomorrow," she said finally. 8 o'clock, before breakfast. Flitwick's permission slip is in my folder under H for historical. Of course it is. Don't be smug, it's an efficient system. He smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd managed in about 3 weeks. He dreamed that night, not the usual dreams, not the green light or the graveyard or Voldemort's cold voice threading through his sleep like wire. He dreamed of a crossroads in the dark, the kind of dark that predates electric light and gas lamp and even fire, the original dark of a world that hadn't yet learned to be afraid of itself. 3 figures stood at the crossroads, but he couldn't see their faces. One held a wand of pale wood. One held a stone. One held nothing, because the third brother had understood, long before the others, that the best things can't be held. The one with nothing turned and looked at Harry directly, and Harry had the distinct impression that it was looking through every version of him simultaneously: the boy under the stairs, the boy on the Quidditch pitch, the boy in the graveyard, the boy sitting in the dark corridor cataloguing someone else's damage, and that it found all of them satisfactory. The ring pulsed on his finger, once, like a second heartbeat. Harry woke up at 6 in the morning feeling more rested than he had in months. The restricted section at 8 in the morning was empty of everyone except Madame Pants, who was at the far end performing some kind of cataloging charm on a section of ancient scrolls and who gave Harry and Hermione a look of pure suspicion tempered only slightly by the sight of Flitwick's permission note. She let them through with the expression of someone releasing something valuable into the custody of people she did not quite trust to deserve it. "Pre-12th century law only," she said. "Any scroll that glows red, do not touch it. If anything bites you, that's your own fault." Harry had a scroll bite him inside of 10 minutes. It was small, a rolled parchment no bigger than his forearm that had been shelved between foundations of the Wisengamot, Volume 3, and a thick leather-bound document with no title on its spine. The bite was more of a sharp pinch, really, the parchment snapping shut around his fingertip with a decisive little crack before releasing him. But it didn't glow red when he picked it up after. It glowed gold. "Hermione," he said. She came around the shelf and stopped when she saw it. "That's not supposed to glow at all," she said. "None of the responses in here are supposed to," she paused. "It's responding to the ring." Harry unrolled it on the reading table. The parchment was old in a way that physical objects rarely managed, old enough that the texture had changed from paper to something closer to skin, fine and slightly warm. The ink had never faded, which meant either remarkable preservation charms or ink that wasn't quite ink in the conventional sense. The heading, in clean angular script, read, "The Peverell Compact, Articles of Magical Education, drafted by Ignotus of the House Peverell-Merlin, called Ambrosius, in the 963rd year of the Common Reckoning, binding upon all who instruct the young in the arts of magic within the boundaries of these isles." Harry sat down. Hermione sat down across from him and started reading at the same speed, which he'd always appreciated. She never tried to read over his shoulder or skip ahead and summarize. They read in silence for 20 minutes. The compact was 6 pages of dense, precisely worded text, and it was one of the most extraordinary documents Harry had ever encountered, which was saying something given that he'd read both The Daily Prophet and Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. The core of it was simple: any person who wished to teach magic to a person under the age of 17 was required to hold a license issued under the compact's authority. The license wasn't merely bureaucratic, it was a literal magical covenant, bound by a formal oath sworn before the ring-bearer. To hold the license was to agree to a set of conditions: that you would not use your position to harm those in your charge, that you would not teach falsehoods as truth, that you would not employ your authority over students to serve political or personal interests above their welfare, and that you would remain accountable to the heir of the Peverell line, who held the Compact's authority and trust for magical Britain. The Ministry of Magic, Harry read, had no authority over the Compact. The Wisingamot had no authority over the Compact. The founders of Hogwarts had built their school under the Compact's authority, not above it, because they understood that legitimate education required a covenant older and more fundamental than any institution. The license, once granted, could be revoked. Harry reached the revocation clause and read it twice. Should a license holder violate the terms of their oath, by harm, by deception, by abuse of authority, by subordination of student welfare to external interest, the ring-bearer may revoke the license by will and word. Revocation requires no tribunal, no process, no permission. It requires only the ring, the heir, and the truth of the violation. Once revoked, a license cannot be reinstated by any authority save the ring-bearer themselves. A person whose license has been revoked may not instruct magic within these isles without facing the full consequence of the Compact's binding. Their own taught magic will turn upon them in proportion to their violation. Hermione had gone very still. "Harry," she said. "I know. The ring on your finger is, I know. Every teacher in this school is teaching under a license that, I know, Hermione." She pressed her hands flat on the table, a gesture she made when she was thinking very fast and needed her body to stay still while she did it. "You can revoke any of them. Any teacher. Instantly. With no legal process, no appeal, no ministry oversight, that's what it says." That's an extraordinary amount of power for one person to." Merlin and Ignotus Peverell didn't think so, Harry said. "They built it this way deliberately." He tapped the third article on the parchment. "Read that bit. The part about why there's no tribunal." Hermione read it. Her lips moved slightly, which only happened when she was reading something that genuinely surprised her. "Because," she read aloud, slowly, "a tribunal can be corrupted, delayed, or politically managed, and the most dangerous teachers are precisely those with the power to corrupt or delay their own accountability. The ring-bearer requires no process because process is the mechanism by which the powerful protect themselves from consequence." She looked up. "Who wrote this?" she asked. "Merlin, apparently." "Right." She sat back. "Right, of course Merlin wrote the only document I've ever read that I think is genuinely correct about institutional power." She rubbed her face with both hands. "Harry, do you understand what this means for you? If you use that ring, I know what it means for me. The ministry has no authority over the Compact," Harry said. "That's in the first article. We just read it." "They won't care what's in the first article, she stopped. Reconsidered. "Actually, Fudge will care enormously, because it will mean he has no lever to pull, which will make him panic, which will make him do something stupid." She was quiet for a moment. "Which isn't necessarily worse than the alternative." Ron appeared at the end of the shelf with 3 pieces of toast on a plate and a look of moderate concern. "You two missed breakfast," he said, offering the toast. "Hermione, you've got that face." "What face?" "The face you make when you found out something incredible and you're deciding whether to be excited or terrified by it." He looked at Harry. "And you've got your other face." "What other face?" "The one where you've already decided what you're going to do and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up." Ron set the plate down on the table, looked at the glowing parchment, and pulled up a chair. "Right. Tell me everything." Harry told him everything. He laid it out plainly: the detention, the corridor, the open door, the stairs, the chamber, the ring, the dream, the library, the Compact. He talked for 10 minutes without interruption, which was either a testament to the story's quality or to how seriously Ron took the expression on his face. When he finished, Ron ate a piece of toast in thoughtful silence. "Umbridge first," Ron said. "Obviously," Harry agreed. Hermione looked between them. "You've both that's your whole reaction." Umbridge first? She's actively hurting people, Hermione. Harry turned the ring on his finger. She had me use a blood quill for 6 hours last month. She's done the same to at least 4 other students that I know of. She's teaching them that they have no rights, that their pain is political, that the ministry's authority supersedes their own bodies. He said it quietly, without heat. That violates every condition in the compact simultaneously. Her license should never have been validated in the first place. I agree with that, Hermione said. I agree completely with that. I'm asking about process. The compact says there is no process for exactly this situation, Harry said. The compact was written in 963, and it's still magically binding or this ring wouldn't have activated. He held up his right hand. The black band sat on his finger, still and plain and definite. I didn't go looking for this. It found me, or I found it, and the difference probably doesn't matter. What matters is that Umbridge is upstairs right now, and she has every intention of putting another blood quill in someone's hand before the end of the week, and I have the legal authority, the oldest legal authority in magical Britain, to stop her. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Then, you said the revocation requires the ring, the heir, and the truth of the violation. Yes. So it won't work if the violation isn't real. It's built-in verification. That's my read of it. She looked at the parchment again. Then she looked at the ring. Then she looked at Harry, and whatever she saw in his face, that quiet ember, that settled certainty, made something in her own expression shift from resistance to something more complicated. When? She asked. She has mandatory attendance assembly at 11, Harry said. Full school. Ron picked up another piece of toast. Better finish these, then, he said. They had 4 hours. Harry used the first one sitting with the compact, reading every article twice and the revocation clause 4 times, not because he was uncertain but because he believed in knowing exactly what you were doing before you did it. The ring seemed to grow warmer as he read, the way a wand warmed when you used it correctly, finding the rhythm of the work it was built for. Hermione used the same hour making notes in her tightest handwriting, cross-referencing the compact's articles against what she knew of current ministry education law. She found 14 direct contradictions between the compact and the educational decrees Umbridge had posted around the school. Ron used the hour eating the third piece of toast very slowly and thinking. Here's what I don't understand, he said eventually. The ring was just sitting down there. In a chamber under the castle. How long has it been there? Since before Hogwarts was built, probably, Harry said. The chamber looks older than the castle. And nobody found it before. In 1,000 years. The door was sealed, Harry said. And the ring fit me. Maybe it couldn't be found until the right person came along. Or, Hermione said, not looking up from her notes, the door opened because this specific situation required it. Because the compact needed to be active. Because someone who holds a teaching license at Hogwarts violated the terms so severely that the ring literally made itself findable to the heir. The room was quiet for a moment. Umbridge opened the door, Ron said. That's my theory, Hermione said. Harry looked at the ring. He thought about 6 hours with the blood quill. He thought about I must not tell lies in his own handwriting, cut into the back of his hand, over and over until the letters stopped bleeding and just stayed. He thought about every student who'd sat in Umbridge's office under the pink wall and the cat plates and the soft awful patience of her, learning that their pain was their own fault and their truth was a lie. She opened the door, Harry said. And I walked through it. He stood up, rolled the compact carefully, and tucked it inside his robes. 2 hours until assembly, he said. Let's get breakfast. They came into the great hall at 9:15, and Harry ate scrambled eggs and toast with the systematic efficiency of someone who understood that whatever happened at 11 o'clock, he would need to have eaten. Hermione picked at porridge and reread her notes. Ron ate 3 sausages and told a joke about a troll that made Neville laugh so hard he inhaled pumpkin juice. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching Harry with the expression he'd adopted since the beginning of 5th year, calculating, waiting, looking for whatever advantage the current situation offered. Harry met his eyes once, without challenge or acknowledgement, and went back to his eggs. Draco's expression flickered. At the staff table, Umbridge sat between Snape and Flitwick, cutting her food into very precise pieces and speaking to no one. She was wearing pink robes with a frill at the collar and a brooch shaped like a kitten, and she looked like someone's sweet elderly aunt, and Harry watched her hands moving over her plate with absolute steadiness and thought about all the forms cruelty could choose when it wanted to be invisible. McGonagall, 3 seats down, was reading the Daily Prophet with the pinched expression she'd been wearing since Umbridge's first week. She'd objected to the blood quill detentions twice in writing to the headmaster and once directly to the ministry. All 3 attempts had produced nothing except a letter from Umbridge informing her that her concerns had been noted and filed. Harry watched McGonagall fold her paper, and thought, not her. She hadn't violated anything. She'd fought every inch she had room to fight and some inches beyond that. Whatever was about to happen at 11 o'clock, it wouldn't touch her. He looked at Snape, who was eating nothing and staring at the middle distance with the expression he wore when he was somewhere else in his head. Harry thought about 7 years of potions, about detention, Potter, about every student Snape had reduced to rubble for the entertainment of the Slytherin table, about the way he'd looked when Harry hadn't been able to achieve a clemency and his response had been contempt rather than strategy. He thought about what the compact said about deception and subordination of student welfare. Not today. Not yet. There was an order to things. Umbridge first. The mandatory assembly was held in the Great Hall at 11, all 4 houses called in by prefects, the benches rearranged to face the staff table where Umbridge stood at a temporary lectern she'd had installed in September. The lectern had the Hogwarts crest on it, which Harry had always thought was probably the most accurately summarizing detail of her entire tenure. She'd taken something that belonged to everyone and put her own event on it. She had parchment. She always had parchment. Today it appeared to be the text of Educational Decree 43, which she intended to read aloud and which Harry had heard about from Lavender Brown, who'd overheard Pansy Parkinson telling Millicent Bulstrode that it would require all student correspondence to be submitted for inspection before leaving the castle. 700 students shuffled and settled. Dumbledore sat at the far right of the staff table, watching Umbridge with his hands folded and his expression perfectly neutral, the expression Harry had spent 4 years trying to decode and had finally concluded was a mask so practiced it had fused to the face beneath it. McGonagall sat 3 seats from Dumbledore. She had a quill in her hand but wasn't writing anything. She was watching Harry. Harry was in the 3rd row, second from the left, with Ron on his right and Hermione on his left. He was very calm. He'd been calm since the library, since the eggs, since he'd put the ring on and heard the click in his bone that meant something had been waiting for him in particular. He turned the ring once, feeling the warm metal against his finger. Umbridge cleared her throat. "Good morning," she said, in the voice like a spoonful of honey gone slightly off. "I am sure you are all wondering why I have called this assembly on a Thursday morning, when many of you will be missing your classes. I want to assure you that the importance of what I have to share with you today far outweighs the minor disruption to your academic schedule." She straightened her parchment. "Educational Decree 43, she began, hereafter to be known as the Hogwarts Communication Oversight Order, establishes as of today's date the following requirements for all student correspondence. Dolores Jane Umbridge," Harry said. He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. There was something about the way it left his mouth, clear and flat and carrying, the way certain notes carry in a concert hall without effort, that moved through the noise of 700 restless students and landed in the silence at the center of the room. Umbridge stopped reading. Every head in the hall turned. Harry was already standing. He didn't remember deciding to stand, he was standing, and the ring on his finger was warm and certain, and he had both hands loose at his sides and he was looking at Umbridge with absolutely nothing in his face except clarity. "Under the authority of the Peverell Compact," Harry said, his voice carrying the same quality as before, not loud, but reaching everywhere, the way old things with real weight behind them reach everywhere, established in the year 963 by Ignotus Peverell and the sorcerer Merlin, in whose covenant the teaching licenses of every instructor at this school are held. I am revoking your license to teach magic. He pressed his thumb to the ring and said 2 words in the almost Latin he'd read off the inside of the band, the words that the ring had been waiting 1,000 years to hear from the right mouth, pactum negatum. The effect was not subtle. The ring blazed, not dramatically, not with a column of light or an explosion of magical energy, but with a deep, resonant pulse of gold that moved outward from Harry's hand like a wave, washing across the room in a single breath. Every student felt it in their chests, several first years grabbed each other's arms. The candles in the chandelier above the hall flared once, brilliant white, and settled. Umbridge made a sound. It wasn't a scream. It was stranger than that. It was the sound of someone realizing that something fundamental had changed about their relationship to the world, the sound of a covenant snapping, like a bowstring pulled past its limit. She stumbled back from the lectern. The parchment she'd been holding fell from her fingers. She raised her wand, the stubby one, the pale pink one she used like an extension of her authority, and Harry watched her face change as she realized that it didn't feel right in her hand anymore. The connection was still there, magic was still there, but something essential about the license had been the foundation of her claim to be here, at this lectern, in front of these students, and that foundation was gone. What, Umbridge said carefully, in the voice of someone who was very frightened and very determined not to show it, did you just do? I revoked your teaching license, Harry said. You can't teach here anymore. If you try, the compact's binding will turn your own magic against you in proportion to the harm you've done. I'd recommend not trying. The hall was absolutely silent. 700 students were holding their breath. Harry could feel Hermione beside him, perfectly still, and Ron, who had his arms folded and his chin up and was looking at Umbridge with an expression of deep satisfaction that he wasn't bothering to conceal. You, Umbridge said. Her voice had changed. The honey was gone. What was underneath it was cold and precise. You have no authority over my position. The Ministry of Magic has no authority over the Compact, Harry said. The Compact predates the Ministry by 900 years. The Ministry's educational decrees are issued under powers derived from the Compact. I just checked. In the library. This morning. Albus, Umbridge said, turning to the far end of the staff table. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Something moved in his eyes, something complicated and old and not entirely readable. Then he looked at Umbridge. It appears, he said gently, that Mr. Potter has done his research. The silence broke all at once. 700 students talking simultaneously produced a sound like a wave breaking against rock, and in the middle of it Harry stood absolutely still, watching Umbridge grip the lectern with both hands as if it were the last solid thing in the room, and felt the ember in his chest burning steadily. It had only just started. Chapter 2, the first revocation. The hall was still roaring when McGonagall stood up. She didn't say anything yet, she just stood, and somehow that was enough to cut the noise by half, because 7 years of students trained to the particular authority of her standing posture reduced the sound level automatically, the way a church bell reduces a crowd. She looked at Harry, and the look wasn't angry and it wasn't approving. It was the look she used when a student had just performed a spell correctly but under circumstances that required careful discussion. Umbridge was still gripping the lectern. She had composed herself with remarkable speed, Harry would give her that. The initial shock, the stumble, the sound that wasn't a scream, all of it had been locked down behind her face in about 40 seconds flat, and what she was showing the hall now was the smile. Not the warm version she used on students she wanted to believe she was harmless. The other one. The one she kept for situations she intended to manage. Students, she said, and her voice was fully controlled, all honey restored, please return to your dormitories in an orderly fashion. This assembly is concluded for the time being. We will reconvene once. No, Harry said. Just the one word. Flat, direct, carrying the same quality as before. Umbridge turned to look at him slowly. I beg your pardon. You don't have the authority to dismiss this assembly, Harry said. You don't have the authority to do anything in this building that requires a teaching license, and that includes convening or dismissing mandatory school gatherings. You're not a teacher here anymore. I am the High Inquisitor of Hogwarts, Umbridge said, very precisely. My authority in this castle derives from the Minister of Magic himself, and no, artifact, she said the word like she was dropping it into a dustbin, from some pre-ministry document changes that. Your High Inquisitor appointment is real, Harry said. I'm not disputing that. The Ministry can appoint anyone it likes to inspect this school. But the High Inquisitor's mandate requires that the person holding the position be a licensed magical educator. It's in the original decree. Article 3, Paragraph 2. He'd read it in Hermione's notes, who had read it in the Hogwarts founding charter, which she'd cross-referenced with the compact while he'd been eating eggs. You're welcome to inspect the school. You just can't teach in it, run mandatory educational gatherings, or assign student attentions, which are all educational functions under the compact. Umbridge's smile was entirely still on her face, which meant it had stopped being a smile and was now just a position her mouth was holding. Where, she said, did a 15-year-old boy obtain a pre-ministry legal document? The same place I obtained the ring, Harry said. Hogwarts. It was already here. From the Slytherin table, someone laughed, not cruelly, just genuinely, the involuntary laugh of someone who found something funny despite not intending to. Several other people joined it before suppressing it. Draco Malfoy had gone very still, his eyes moving between Harry and Umbridge with the focused attention of someone recalculating a situation rapidly. McGonagall had sat back down. She was writing something. Mr. Potter. Dumbledore's voice was measured and carried easily through the room. He'd risen from his seat now, tall and unhurried, and was looking at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was a considerable thing to look at. I wonder if I might suggest that further discussion of this matter be moved to a more private, with respect, Professor, Harry said, no. The High Inquisitor has been conducting detentions that involve blood quills in front of no witnesses. She's been enforcing educational decrees that restrict speech and correspondence in ways that violate the Compact's teaching conditions. She's done all of it behind closed doors because closed doors are where that kind of thing survives. He paused. The revocation happened in public because the harm happened in public. Everyone in this hall has sat through her assemblies and her decrees and her inspections. They were here for the problem. They should be here for the resolution. The room had gone very quiet again. Harry could hear his own voice clearly, could hear the difference between his normal speaking voice and whatever this was, not louder, not more performance, just more present. Like the ring was amplifying something that had always been there, some quality of intention that usually got muffled by uncertainty or politeness or the constant background awareness of what people would think. He wasn't uncertain. He wasn't particularly concerned about what people thought. He was just telling the truth as clearly as he could. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Very well, he said, and sat back down, and Harry understood that this was not concession so much as observation, Dumbledore filing something, updating some internal calculation, watching to see what Harry would do next. The look on his face was almost, but not quite, something like pride. You mentioned blood quills, called a voice from the Ravenclaw benches. Michael Corner, 5th year, who Harry knew had been assigned 3 separate detentions with Umbridge. His voice was shaking slightly but he'd said it anyway, which took more courage than it looked like from the outside. Yes, Harry said. She used one on me, said a second voice. This one was smaller, a 3rd-year girl from Hufflepuff named Maisie Trevelyan, who'd been assigned a detention for what Umbridge called impertinent questioning during supervised study. For 2 hours. My mum doesn't know. Umbridge's smile was gone. These are serious accusations, she began. They're testimonies, Harry said. There's a difference. An accusation is something you have to prove. A testimony is something that already happened and is being stated by someone who was there. He looked around the room. Anyone else? 6 more hands went up. 2 were Gryffindors. 1 was a Slytherin second year that Harry didn't know but whose expression, when Umbridge's eyes swept to her, was exactly the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment for a long time. 1 was a Hufflepuff prefect who looked surprised by her own hand being up. Umbridge had been standing very straight and still. Now she took 1 step sideways from the lectern, and the movement had a different quality than her normal movements, more careful, more considered, like she was reassessing the physical geography of the room. "I will not," she said, in a voice that was still controlled but now contained something underneath the control, something that was working very hard, "be subjected to a trial by schoolchildren arranged by a student with a piece of jewelry he found in a basement." "It's not a trial," Harry said. "The revocation is already done. This is the explanation." He turned the ring on his finger. "You can leave the castle whenever you like. Your High Inquisitor status is a ministry matter and I'd encourage you to bring your concerns to Fudge directly. Tell him the Peverell Compact was invoked. I'd be curious to hear his legal team's response." The Slytherin second year made a sound that was definitely a laugh and converted it into a cough. Umbridge looked at Harry for a long moment. It was not a look Harry had seen from her before. All the previous looks had been versions of management, of control, of the careful assessment of how much damage she could safely apply to someone before it became inconvenient. This look had none of that. This was just a person looking at something that had genuinely surprised them, the naked face that shows for a second before the armor goes back up. Then the armor went back up. "We will see," Umbridge said quietly, "how far your antique document gets you when the ministry responds." "I look forward to it," Harry said. She walked out of the great hall. She walked steadily, chin level, the click of her heels deliberate and even on the stone floor, and she didn't look back, and Harry watched her go and thought, that's what a person looks like when they're already planning their next move. He filed it. The doors swung shut behind her. Then all 700 students started talking at once, and the sound was so enormous and immediate that Harry sat down purely from the physical impact of it. Ron grabbed his shoulder. "That," he said, leaning close to be heard, "was the most incredible thing I have ever personally witnessed, and I once watched Fred accidentally transfigure Filch's cat into a filing cabinet." "Hermione," Harry said. She was already writing something in her notebook. "I know," she said without looking up. "I'm documenting everything. Every name that gave testimony just now, everything that was said, date and time. If this goes to any kind of legal proceeding we want a record." She paused. "Which it will. It absolutely will. I know. The ministry is going to respond within 24 hours, Harry. Fudge has people watching this school. I know that too." She finally looked up. Her expression was the one she used when she was fighting between what she thought was tactically unwise and what she knew was morally right, and the two had crossed enough times that she'd developed a specific face for the crossing. "You did the right thing," she said, which cost her something to say before she'd finished all the legal analysis. "I want that noted." "Noted," Harry said, and meant it. The aftermath of the assembly didn't settle, it rearranged. Within an hour, Hogwarts had reorganized itself around the event the way a flock of starlings reorganizes around a stone dropped through it, the shape changing but the movement continuing. The 6th and 7th year prefects held an informal meeting in the library at noon that Harry wasn't invited to but heard about through Neville, who'd been asked to leave when it became apparent he was going to defend Harry regardless of what anyone said. The prefect consensus, Neville reported, was roughly split. A third of them thought Harry had done something extraordinary, a third thought he'd done something catastrophically reckless, the final third were primarily Ravenclaws who were fascinated by the legal architecture of what had happened and weren't prepared to render a verdict until they'd examined the compact themselves. Draco Malfoy passed Harry in the corridor after charms and said nothing, which was more significant than anything he could have said. Malfoy's silence was a form of recalibration. Harry had seen it twice before, once after the Triwizard Tournament, once after the Department of Mysteries, and both times it meant that Malfoy was doing rapid triage on the implications for himself. The fact that he didn't sneer, didn't posture, didn't even make eye contact, meant that the implications were significant enough to require serious thought. Flitwick had cancelled the second charms period and spent the hour writing something at his desk with the focus and urgency of a man trying to get ahead of a very fast-moving situation. Harry caught one glance of the parchment as he passed and saw Wisengamot, Educational Covenant, Peverell Precedent in Flitwick's tiny handwriting before the little professor turned the page over. Snape had not appeared at lunch. Or dinner. His absence sat at the staff table like a filled chair, and Harry noted it without drawing conclusions. At 1:45, a note appeared on the Gryffindor Common Room notice board, Mr. Potter. My office. 2 p.m. APWBD Dumbledore's office was exactly the same as it always was, circular, warm, full of moving things that caught light, the portraits of former headmasters watching from the walls with varying degrees of interest. Fawkes was on his perch and raised his head when Harry came in, regarding him with the bright, considering look he used when he was making some kind of assessment. Harry sat in the chair across the desk. Dumbledore poured tea without asking whether Harry wanted any and placed it in front of him, and sat down, and looked at Harry across the expanse of the desk with an expression that Harry had learned, over 4.5 years, to read fairly accurately. This one was, I have a number of significant concerns, and I am deciding how transparently to express them. You've had a productive morning, Dumbledore said. I've had a necessary morning, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore looked down at his own tea. The distinction between the productive and the necessary is one of the more useful ones. Many people confuse them. He paused. May I see the ring? Harry held out his right hand. Dumbledore looked at it, didn't touch it, just looked, with the focused attention of someone who recognized what they were seeing. His expression shifted fractionally. The Peverell sub-basement chamber, he said. I have known about that chamber for 31 years. Harry looked at him. The door was sealed, Dumbledore said. I sealed it myself, in 1964, when I became headmaster. I judged that the chamber and its contents were sensitive. He took a small sip of tea. I also knew, because I had read the compact, that the ring would unseal itself when it chose to, for whom it chose to. I chose to be the mechanism of delay rather than the mechanism of prevention. I am not sure that was the correct choice. Why did you seal it? Because 1964 was a difficult year. There were individuals on the staff at that time whose licenses, under the compact's terms, were deeply questionable. I was concerned that if the ring became active in the hands of someone young and angry, the results would be, not surgical. Someone young and angry, Harry said. Like me. That was my fear, yes. Harry thought about that. He turned the ring once on his finger. And now that you've seen what happened this morning. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that lasted precisely long enough to feel considered rather than evasive. I think, he said carefully, that you were neither young nor angry in the sense I feared. You were thorough. You were precise. You read the compact before you acted. You chose the moment deliberately. He looked at Harry directly. You also gave Dolores an exit and the option of leaving with dignity. That was, not something I expected. She violated 9 of the compact's 12 conditions, Harry said. I didn't need to humiliate her. The revocation was enough. Quite. Dumbledore set down his tea. I want to be honest with you, Harry, because I think you have arrived at a point where you deserve honesty over management. The word management sat briefly in the air between them, and they both acknowledged it without discussing it. The ministry will respond. Cornelius is going to be incandescent. You said that word like it's my problem. Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. It will affect this school. The students. Regardless of the legal merits of your action, Cornelius has the ability to make things very difficult in practical terms. I know, Harry said. And Umbridge being here was already making things very difficult in practical terms. For 7 students that we know of and probably more that didn't raise their hands. The comparison isn't close. No, Dumbledore agreed quietly. It isn't. They sat with that for a moment. Are you going to try to stop me from using the ring again? Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. I'm going to ask you to be careful. Which is different. I'm always careful, Harry said. People think I'm reckless because I do things they wouldn't do. But I always know what I'm doing when I do it. He put his cup down and stood up. Dumbledore watched him from behind the desk, and the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black in the upper left corner was watching too, with an expression of fascinated aristocratic attention. One more thing, Dumbledore said, as Harry reached the door. Harry stopped but didn't turn around. The Compact's revocation clause, Dumbledore said. You read that the ring-bearer can also grant licenses. I read it. Yes, Dumbledore said, very quietly. I thought you had. Harry left without responding, because there was nothing to say to that yet, and Dumbledore, of all people, understood the value of leaving things temporarily unspoken. Dinner that evening was an event. The Great Hall had the specific atmosphere of a place where something significant had happened and nobody had yet been told the official version, so everyone was constructing their own version at considerable volume and comparing notes. Harry heard at least 3 separate theories about where the ring had come from, ranging from fairly accurate to one version involving a dragon and the Triwizard Cup that he chose not to correct. The blood quill detentions were being discussed openly at every table, and names were being added. Now that it was safe to say them out loud, they multiplied. Hannah Abbott, it turned out, had been assigned a blood quill detention in October that she hadn't told anyone about because Umbridge had told her that her parents would be contacted and informed she had been making false accusations about ministry officials, and Hannah's parents were Muggleborn and she'd been terrified. She told Hermione this at the Hufflepuff table after dinner, quietly but steadily, and Hermione wrote it down. The Slytherin second year who'd raised her hand, Harry learned her name was Vivian Selwyn, no relation to the Death Eater Selwyn, or so she told it, had apparently been assigned a detention for referring to Umbridge's decree about non-human magical creatures as factually incomplete in class, which Harry thought was the most Slytherin possible reason for a detention and also the most quietly courageous. At 7:30, a ministry owl arrived. It was a large, official-looking bird with a red ribbon on its leg, and it landed directly in front of Harry's plate with the purposeful accuracy of a trained messenger. The letter it carried had 3 different ministry seals on it and was addressed to Mr. H.J. Potter, Gryffindor Tower, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, urgent, ministerial priority. Harry opened it with his butter knife and read it without expression. The letter was from the Office of the Minister for Magic, co-signed by Umbridge, and it made 3 demands: that Harry surrender the ring to ministry custody immediately, that he submit to an interview with ministry officials regarding the illegal deployment of pre-statutory magical artifacts, and that he appear before a Wisengamot disciplinary panel no later than Friday of the following week to answer charges of interference with authorized ministry personnel. Harry folded the letter back up, set it on the edge of his plate, and reached for his pumpkin juice. Well? Ron said. They want the ring, Harry said. And they want me at the Wisengamot. Are you going? To the Wisengamot? Probably. It'll be useful to have the discussion in front of witnesses. And the ring? Harry looked down at his right hand. The black band sat on his finger, quiet and warm and completely at home. The idea of surrendering it to the ministry had approximately the same feeling as the idea of surrendering his wand, a kind of instinctive physical impossibility, the body's understanding arriving before the brain's reasoning. No, he said. Ron nodded like he'd expected that. Thought so. Hermione had read the letter over Harry's shoulder. The charge of interference with authorized ministry personnel is actually interesting, she said. Because if they pursue it in the Wisengamot, they have to formally acknowledge the Compact's existence and argue that it doesn't supersede their authority. Which requires them to present a legal argument. Which I can counter. Her voice had taken on the quality it got when an intellectual challenge was overtaking her anxiety about the stakes. I've been building the counterargument since this morning. There are 4 precedents in the Wiesengemot's own records from the 15th century that support the compact's primacy. You've been building a legal argument since this morning, Harry said. Since 8:45 this morning, yes. Hermione, it's 7:45 at night. The case is important. We should tell Sirius, Ron said. Harry had already been thinking about that. Sirius was in hiding, in Grimmauld Place, living in a world that had already reduced too much and asked too little of him. The letter would have to be careful, coded in the way they'd been coding them since September. But Sirius deserved to know. Sirius, above most people alive, would understand exactly what Harry was doing and why, and would probably laugh for about 30 seconds before getting serious and strategic, and that combination was exactly what Harry needed right now. After dinner, Harry said. He picked up his fork. Around him the hall continued its ongoing revision of the day's events, voices rising and falling, the story already becoming something larger than itself, the way significant things always do when enough people start talking about them. He wrote the letter to Sirius in the dormitory while Ron looked over his shoulder and occasionally corrected his spelling, because even coded letters should be legible. He kept it brief, the key facts, the ring, the compact, the revocation, the ministry letter, Umbridge's departure. At the end he added, I know you're going to tell me to be careful. I am being careful. This is what careful looks like when you're me. He sent it with Hedwig, who took the letter with the air of a professional who had long since accepted that her owner's correspondence was usually significant and occasionally dangerous. Then he sat on his bed, everyone else's voices drifting up through the dormitory from the common room below, and turned the ring over in his fingers. The warm weight of it. The click when he'd put it on, in the bone of his hand, up through his wrist. He thought about the list Hermione had given him after dinner, not the blood quill testimony list, the other one. The one she'd compiled quietly over the last several hours, cross-referencing the compact's conditions against the staff roster. He hadn't asked her to make it. She'd made it because she was Hermione, and because once a problem was framed in legal terms she moved through it methodically, and because she trusted Harry's judgment enough now to give him information without lecturing him about what to do with it. The list had 7 names on it. 7 names besides Umbridge. 7 people who had, in ways ranging from the minor to the significant, violated the terms of the compact, teaching falsehoods, using their authority to harm students, serving political interests over educational ones. 7 licenses that the ring had the authority to revoke. 7 wasn't a small number when you were talking about a teaching staff. Harry put the ring back on and lay back on his bed, staring at the canopy, and thought about the weight of old names and the responsibility that came attached to them. The Peverell Compact wasn't a weapon. He'd been very clear about that to himself from the first moment of understanding what it was. It was an accountability mechanism. It was the thing that came before institutions, that institutions were supposed to be built on, the simple, radical idea that people who taught children had a responsibility to those children that superseded their employment contract, their political allegiance, and their personal advantage. It wasn't radical, really. It was so obviously true that it had apparently taken Merlin and Ignotus Peverell to codify it because everyone else had assumed it was too obvious to need writing down. He thought about Snape. Specifically, he thought about a classroom of 11-year-olds encountering their first potions lesson, sitting across from a man who had decided before they arrived which of them would succeed and which would fail, who used cruelty as pedagogy and contempt as correction, who had spent 17 years selecting student welfare as the thing most expendable when it conflicted with his other priorities. He thought about Neville Longbottom, who was brilliant and careful and determined, and who trembled in potions for 4 years before the fear became so habitual that it looked like incompetence. Not yet, he told himself. There's an order to things. But he looked at the ring on his finger in the dark of the dormitory and was very honest with himself about the fact that when the time came for Snape, he wasn't going to feel conflicted about it. Morning came grey and sharp, the October kind that promised cold and delivered it. Harry was in the Great Hall by 7, earlier than most students, sitting with tea and a piece of toast and reading the Daily Prophet with the specific focus of someone looking for how fast a story travels. The front page headline read, "Student uses mystery artifact to strip Ministry official of teaching authority, Fudge demands immediate legal action." Harry read the article twice. It was wrong about several things. It described the ring as an alleged ancient relic of disputed provenance, referred to Harry as Harry Potter, who has previously claimed you-know-who has returned, in a way designed to imply that the second fact discredited the first, and quoted Umbridge as saying that the assembly had been disrupted by a disturbed young man with a history of attention-seeking behavior. The article did not mention the blood quill testimonies. Harry noted the omission carefully. On page 4, buried beneath a piece about a Quidditch League dispute, was a short paragraph that had clearly been added late and grudgingly. Several current Hogwarts students have provided statements to independent magical media alleging the use of unauthorized disciplinary methods including enchanted writing implements at the school. The Ministry has not responded to requests for comment. He folded the paper. When Hermione arrived at 7:30, she was already carrying the Quibbler, which she'd never done before in her life, and when she sat down she opened it and pointed at the headline on page 1 without preamble. Heir of Peverell invokes ancient compact, full testimony from 8 students. Luna's father, Hermione said. He runs the Quibbler, Harry said. Luna was in the hall this morning, Hermione said. She must have written to him last night. Harry picked up the Quibbler and read the article. Xenophilius Lovegood had clearly written the whole thing at considerable speed and in considerable excitement, and the piece was the most factually accurate account of the previous day's events that Harry had seen in print. Every testimony from the assembly was included, named and dated. The compact was quoted directly. The Ministry's letter to Harry was reproduced in full, and beneath it was a one-sentence note that read, "A ministry that demands the surrender of a 1,000-year-old magical covenant instrument is either deeply ignorant of its own legal foundations or deeply afraid of them. We at the Quibbler find both possibilities instructive." "I want to shake his hand," Ron said, appearing with a plate of bacon and reading over Harry's shoulder. "He also includes a sidebar about the Crumplehorn Snorkack," Hermione said, "which somewhat undermines the core article is accurate," Harry said. "That's what matters." Across the Great Hall, he could see students reading both papers simultaneously, comparing, arguing. He could see Vivian Selwyn, the Slytherin second year, reading the Quibbler with intense focus, running her finger under lines of text. He could see Maisie Trevelyan, the third-year Hufflepuff, being approached by a group of her housemates who were clearly asking her questions, and Maisie answering them with the careful steadiness of someone who had already decided, the previous morning, that they were done being silent. He could see McGonagall at the staff table, the Quibbler folded in her lap in a way that suggested she'd read it rather than arrived with it, watching the hall with an expression Harry couldn't fully parse but that contained, underneath the professional composure, something that looked like relief. "Today," Hermione said, "is going to be very complicated." "I know," Harry said. "The Ministry could send someone by this afternoon. They're going to want to interview you, want to examine the ring, want to, let them come," Harry said simply, and poured himself more tea, and meant it entirely. He was done being managed. Done being the stone on a board, moved by other hands toward ends he wasn't told. The ring on his finger was his, the oldest possible kind of his, the kind that went back before parents, before prophecies, before the particular accident of being the boy who lived. It was his because it fit, because he'd walked through a door that opened for him specifically, because something ancient and deliberate had been waiting for the right person and had found them in a 15-year-old in a corridor doing someone else's filing. He thought, Merlin built it for this. For someone who would read it carefully and use it precisely. For someone who wouldn't flinch when the Ministry came, because the compact preceded the Ministry by 900 years and that precedence was not a technicality, it was the whole point. The hall filled around him, the day beginning its noise, students moving through it with the altered sense of possibility that comes after something changes. He could feel it in the quality of the conversations, in the way people walked, in the speed at which news and opinion were traveling from table to table and back. Something had cracked open in the castle, and what was coming through the crack was light and uncertainty in equal measure. Outside the high windows, the October sky was the color of old pewter. Harry drank his tea, read the Quibbler article a second time, and prepared for a very long day. Chapter 3, The Weight of Old Names. The ministry official arrived at 2:30. Harry was in Charms when it happened, or rather, Harry was in the Charms classroom when the door opened and McGonagall appeared in the doorway and said, "Professor Flitwick, I apologize for the interruption." "Harry, with me please," in a tone that communicated several things simultaneously, that this was unavoidable, that she had already formed an opinion about it, and that her opinion was not favorable to the ministry's position. Flitwick waved Harry out with a small understanding nod, the kind of nod that said he'd read both papers that morning and had spent the intervening hours thinking about ancient Covenant law. McGonagall walked quickly, which meant Harry had to lengthen his stride to keep up, and she spoke without turning her head. "His name is Corvin Thatch. He's the Deputy Director of the Ministry's Educational Oversight Committee. He arrived 20 minutes ago with 2 Aurors, which was unnecessary and theatrical, and he's currently in the entrance hall waiting for permission to enter the castle proper, which I have not yet granted. He needs permission to enter. Under the Hogwarts Charter, any ministry official conducting an investigation must receive formal permission from the headmaster before entering beyond the entrance hall. Dumbledore is aware." "He is," she said, with a fractional pause, taking his time. Harry almost smiled. "Where are we going?" "To the entrance hall. Dumbledore asked me to accompany you. Apparently he feels your presence at this meeting is," another pause, "appropriate." They came down the main staircase and Harry saw Thatch before Thatch saw him. The man was about 60, with the kind of lean, maintained fitness that suggested deliberate effort rather than natural constitution. His robes were ministry grey, not the bright, self-important scarlet that senior officials sometimes preferred, but a quiet grey that cost more and advertised less. His face was angular and precise, with deep-set eyes the color of weathered slate, and he was holding a leather portfolio that he was not currently looking at because he was studying the entrance hall with the careful attention of someone making an assessment. The 2 Aurors flanking him were younger, professional, wearing the expression of people who had been briefed to be imposing and were attempting it. Thatch's eyes found Harry on the stairs. Something moved in those grey eyes, quick, calibrating. Not hostility, exactly. Evaluation. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was measured and educated, the careful pronunciation of someone who'd worked at sounding authoritative for long enough that it had become genuine. "I'm Corvin Thatch. I head the Educational Oversight Committee." "I know who you are," Harry said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. Thatch didn't blink. "Then you know why I'm here." "You want the ring," Harry said. "And you want me to feel uncertain about whether I was entitled to use it. Those are 2 separate objectives and I'm going to disappoint you on both." There was a brief silence. One of the Aurors shifted his weight. Thatch looked at Harry with the expression of someone reassessing the opening position of a negotiation. "You're more direct than I expected," Thatch said. "People keep saying that," Harry said. McGonagall made a small sound that was absolutely not a laugh. Dumbledore arrived from the corridor to the left of the staircase, unhurried, wearing deep blue robes and the particular expression of serene authority he deployed in situations he wanted to navigate rather than confront. "Corvin," he said warmly, as if greeting an old colleague rather than an official who'd arrived with Aurors. "Shall we find somewhere more comfortable?" The meeting happened in a conference room off the first-floor corridor, a room Harry hadn't been in before, long and oak-paneled, with a fireplace and a table that could seat 12. Dumbledore sat at the head. Thatch sat across from Harry. McGonagall sat beside Harry with her hands folded and her expression perfectly composed, which was her version of armor. The 2 Aurors remained standing by the door, because Dumbledore had suggested, very gently, that they might be more comfortable there, and neither of them had been willing to argue with Albus Dumbledore about where they stood. Thatch opened his portfolio, removed a sheaf of parchments, and placed them on the table between himself and Harry with deliberate precision, the way you place pieces in a game you intend to win. "Let's establish some foundational points," he said. "The Ministry of Magic, under the authority of the Wizengamot, governs magical education in Britain. That authority is established by the Education Act of 1872, the Hogwarts Oversight Charter of 1923, and the Educational Administration regulations currently in force. These are the operative legal frameworks. They're the most recent legal frameworks, Harry said. They're not the foundational ones. Thatch looked at him. The Peverell Compact, if it exists, it exists. You've had people check this morning. The Wisengamot archives have 3 references to it in records from the 14th and 15th centuries. A pause. You've had people checking too, Thatch said. Hermione Granger has been checking since yesterday morning. She's thorough. Something shifted in Thatch's expression, not irritation exactly, but a recalibration, the way a chess player looks when the board shows them a configuration they hadn't anticipated. He glanced at Dumbledore, who was watching the exchange with the serene attention of someone watching an interesting match. Even granting the Compact's historical existence, Thatch said, the question of whether a pre-statutory artifact confers operative legal authority in modern wizarding Britain is, not a question the Ministry gets to answer, Harry said. The Compact's first article explicitly removes it from Ministry and Wisengamot jurisdiction. The Compact predates both by several centuries. You don't get to be the judge of whether the document that precedes your authority is valid, because your authority derives from that document. Thatch was quiet for a moment. That's a sophisticated legal argument for a 15-year-old, he said. It's Hermione's argument. I just agreed with it. Harry held Thatch's eyes. But I'll tell you my argument, which is simpler. Dolores Umbridge used a blood quill on 8 students in this school. Possibly more. The device causes pain and injury. She did it as punishment for speaking truthfully in her classroom. That's not a debatable violation of whatever framework you want to apply. The Compact calls it a violation. Basic human decency calls it a violation. The fact that the Ministry sent her here and backed her up doesn't make it less of a violation, it just makes the Ministry complicit. The room was very still. Thatch didn't look away from Harry, and Harry noticed something in the quality of his stillness. This wasn't anger, wasn't embarrassment. It was a more complex response than that. There was something in Thatch's face that suggested he had an opinion about Umbridge that he was carefully not expressing, and the effort of not expressing it was measurable. The Ministry did not endorse the use of blood quills, Thatch said, with precision. Then you should have been watching more carefully, Harry said. That's your own committee's mandate. Educational oversight. She was your person in this building and she was doing it with your backing and your decrees and your authority. If you didn't know, that's a failure of oversight. If you did know, he let the sentence end there. He didn't need to finish it. Thatch set his hands flat on the table. They were still hands, the hands of a man who'd spent decades in meetings, in negotiations, in rooms like this one. What do you want, Mr. Potter? The question landed differently than Thatch had probably intended it. It landed like a genuine question. Harry looked at him directly. I want the students in this school to be safe and honestly taught. That's it. That's the entire thing. The ring is a mechanism for enforcing exactly that, for holding teachers to the terms they agreed to when they took the license. I'm not interested in political power or fighting with the Ministry. I'm interested in the thing the Compact was built for. And if the Ministry moves against the Compact's authority, against Hogwarts, then the Ministry should read the Compact's 7th article more carefully, Harry said, which describes what happens to institutions that attempt to dissolve it. Thatch looked at him for a long moment. Then he gathered his parchments, closed his portfolio, and stood. The 2 Aurors straightened. The Minister will want a formal response, Thatch said. I'll be available, Harry said. Thatch looked at Dumbledore. Albus. Something in the way he said it, formal but with the texture of familiarity beneath it, suggested they'd known each other a long time and that the relationship was complicated. Corvin, Dumbledore said, in exactly the same tone. Thatch left. The Aurors followed him. The door closed. McGonagall exhaled, a single precise breath. Well, she said. He's not finished, Harry said. No, Dumbledore agreed quietly. He is very much not finished. Corvin Thatch is the most intelligent man in the Ministry and the most patient. He came here today to assess you, not to retrieve the ring. He now knows what he is dealing with. What does he do next? McGonagall asked. He looks for the Compact's weakness, Dumbledore said. He has been doing it for 30 years, in various indirect ways. He simply didn't know there was a ring-bearer until yesterday. Harry stood up. I need to go back to the library, he said. The library that afternoon had a different quality than the previous morning, then it had been empty and anticipatory, now it was populated with purpose. 3 Ravenclaw sixth years had gotten there first and were working through the Hogwarts founding charter with the intensity of people who had recently discovered that their previous understanding of their own school's legal status was incomplete. They looked at Harry when he came in with an expression that was half respect and half the specific hunger Ravenclaws got when they were in the presence of someone who had original information they wanted access to. Harry sat at the back table and unrolled the compact. He'd been thinking about the 7th article since he'd mentioned it to Thatch, because he'd read it twice and understood the broad shape of it but not the specifics, and the specifics mattered. He found the article and read it carefully, tracing the almost Latin with his finger. The 7th article was titled Protection of the Compact's Foundation. It said, translated as closely as Harry could manage, that the Compact was not merely a document but a living covenant, bound into the magical foundations of every licensed teaching institution in Britain. To attempt to dissolve the Compact by force, by decree, by legal mechanism, by any institutional authority, would trigger the Covenant's protection, which was described in terms that Harry read 3 times before he understood them. The Compact's dissolution would dissolve the Covenant binding on every teaching license simultaneously. Which meant every teacher in Britain would lose their license at once. Not revoked, dissolved, which was a different thing. Revocation left the teacher's magic intact but removed their authority to teach. Dissolution removed the covenant binding entirely, which meant that every piece of magic taught under a dissolved license became unmoored from its teacher, which meant, in practical terms, that every charm, curse, enchantment, and spell taught in Britain's magical schools over the past 1,000 years would require its practitioners to re-establish their own sovereign magical relationship with those techniques, rather than relying on the institutional covenant that underpinned their education. Harry sat back and looked at the ceiling. It wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't instant chaos. A wizard who'd learned to cast Wingardium Leviosa wouldn't suddenly forget how. But the scaffolding of institutionally sanctioned magical education, the framework that allowed people to teach magic collectively, that allowed Hogwarts to exist as a school rather than just a building where talented individuals happened to gather, would dissolve. Hogwarts would lose its legal right to exist as a school. And Thatch, Harry understood now, had known this was possible for 30 years. He'd been circling it, looking for the mechanism, trying to find the legal pathway to dissolution, not because he was simply power-hungry, but because he believed, genuinely believed, that unregulated ancient bloodline authority over magical education was precisely the kind of archaic power structure that modern wizarding Britain should have outgrown. He wasn't wrong that the idea was worth examining. He was wrong about what to replace it with. Harry rolled the compact back up and held it for a moment, thinking. The ring pulsed once, warm on his finger. He found Hermione in the common room after dinner, surrounded by parchment, which was her natural habitat. Ron was playing chess with Seamus at the next table and losing with the specific kind of grace that meant he was letting Seamus win because Seamus had been having a difficult week. Harry sat down across from Hermione and said, "Tell me what you know about Corvin Thatch." She looked up. More than most people would. He's been on the Educational Oversight Committee for 31 years. He was a Hogwarts student, Ravenclaw, top of his year according to the historical records. He wrote his thesis at the Wizarding Academy of Prague on the governance of magical education institutions in post-medieval Europe. She paused. It was apparently excellent. Flitwick mentioned it once. What's his actual position? He thinks Hogwarts has too much independence, Hermione said. He's been trying to increase ministry oversight for decades. He helped draft the original High Inquisitor decree, not the specific Umbridge appointment, but the mechanism. He thought having ministry-approved inspectors was reasonable oversight. She hesitated. In principle, that's not insane. In principle, Harry said. In practice, the mechanism got used to install Umbridge, which I don't think he anticipated or wanted. He's not cruel. He's ideological. She looked at Harry steadily. He genuinely believes that old bloodline power is a structural problem. That having one person with an ancient ring be the ultimate authority over magical education is exactly the kind of unaccountable hereditary privilege that should have been superseded by democratic institutional structures centuries ago. Harry nodded slowly. He's not entirely wrong about that either. Hermione blinked. You think, I think the ring being mine because my name is Peverell and the ring fits my finger it's not a bad system, but it's not a perfect one either. It's an emergency mechanism. It's what you need when institutions fail. He looked at the ring. Institutions did fail. That's what I'm dealing with. But Thatch has a point that the ring being in my hands because of my name is exactly the kind of thing people should question. He looked up at her. Which is why the granting clause matters. Hermione leaned forward. You keep mentioning the granting clause. You mentioned it to Dumbledore and he recognized it and you didn't follow up. Harry, what does the granting clause actually say? Harry opened his mouth to answer and then stopped, because across the common room the portrait hole opened and Luna Lovegood climbed through it, which was unusual, because Luna was a Ravenclaw and the Gryffindor portrait hole did not generally admit non-Gryffindors without some form of prior arrangement. Luna looked around the room, spotted Harry with the uncanny accuracy she always deployed, and walked over. She was wearing radish earrings and carrying a copy of the Quibbler and a large paper bag. She sat down in the remaining chair as if she'd been expected. My father sends his regards, she said. And some treacle fudge. She placed the bag on the table. He says the article about the testimonies has received more owls than anything he's published since the Stubby Boardman piece in 2001, which he considers very significant. Tell him thank you, Harry said. The article was accurate. He was rather excited. He says Old Covenant magic reactivating in the current climate is exactly the sort of thing that happens before major shifts in the magical world's foundation. She tilted her head at Harry with the serene directness she used that always made people feel seen in ways they hadn't prepared for. You're going to use it again. Soon. It wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said. Good, Luna said, with complete simplicity. There are people in this school who should have lost their licenses a long time ago. She reached into the bag and extracted a piece of treacle fudge. The fudge is quite good, she told Hermione. Your expression suggests you need some. Hermione took the fudge. Luna, Harry said, how did you get into the common room? The fat lady and I have an understanding, Luna said, which explained nothing and somehow everything. The next 3 days had the quality of a breath held. Umbridge remained in the castle, which Harry had expected. Her High Inquisitor status gave her the right to occupy her office and conduct inspections, and without a ministry order to remove her she wasn't legally obligated to leave. She moved through the corridors with the careful measured step of someone navigating territory that had changed its rules, the educational decrees still on the walls, the pink cardigan and the kitten brooch still present, the smile slightly different in quality, tighter, more controlled, working harder. She did not take any classes. She did not assign any detentions. She inspected 2 lessons, Sprout's Herbology and Bin's History of Magic, with her clipboard and her assessing gaze, and wrote her reports, and said nothing to either teacher that could be construed as instruction. Harry watched her do it and recognized the strategy. She was demonstrating that she still had a function, that the High Inquisitor role remained intact even with the teaching license revoked. She was building the ministry's argument that the revocation was limited and that her presence at Hogwarts was still legally justified. It was smart. He filed it. On the second day, a letter came from Sirius, coded as always in the language of a Muggle chess correspondence club they'd invented together in third year. Opening gambit aggressive and well chosen. Impressed by the research before the move, that's the part that matters. Knight takes queen is a more complex board position than you'd get from a straightforward exchange. Keep watching the rooks. They're slow but they don't stop. Flushed with something that would embarrass me if I said it plainly. You know what I mean. Harry read it twice and felt something warm and steady behind his sternum that had nothing to do with the ring. On the third day, Harry found Neville in the greenhouses. He'd gone there to think. The greenhouses were quiet in late October, the growing season winding down, only the cold-weather specimens still demanding attention, and Neville had a standing arrangement with Professor Sprout to tend to them after classes. Harry sat on an upturned planting crate and watched Neville work, careful, attentive, the same hands that shook in potions moving with complete confidence through a tray of frost-resistant gillyweed. "You're going to do Snape next," Neville said, without looking up. Harry didn't confirm or deny it. "How did you know?" "Because you've been watching him differently since the assembly." Neville moved to the next tray. "Like you watch problems you've already solved but haven't executed yet." Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom had grown in the past year in ways that didn't show up in height or breadth but were visible if you watched, the way he held himself, the way he entered rooms now, the slow accumulation of confidence that came from someone discovering their actual capabilities after years of being told they had none. "He violated the compact," Harry said simply. "More than once. More than twice. Sustained, deliberate violation of the conditions against harming students and teaching falsehood as truth." "I know," Neville said. "When it happens," Harry said, "you don't have to be there." Neville put down his trowel and looked at Harry directly. His jaw was set in the way it had been set in the Department of Mysteries, in the way it was set when Neville Longbottom decided that something mattered enough to be worth the fear. "I want to be there," he said. Harry nodded. He chose Thursday morning. Snape's potions lesson ran from 8 to 10, double period, Gryffindor and Slytherin 5th years, which meant Harry was in the room already and there was no spectacle of interruption, no assembly, no announced confrontation. Just a classroom. Harry thought carefully about that choice. The Umbridge revocation had needed to be public because the harm had been public and because the shock of it, the undeniability of it in front of hundreds of witnesses, had been the mechanism that broke the pattern of silence around what she'd been doing. That was the right choice for that situation. Snape was different. Snape's harm was different, it was the kind that accumulated slowly, that hid inside the reasonable-looking container of academic high standards and professional severity, that looked like rigor from the outside and felt like erosion from the inside. The students who'd been damaged by it were in this classroom. The revocation should be here. He took his seat. Ron beside him, Hermione across the aisle. Neville 3 seats to Harry's right, sitting straight, hands flat on the desk. Snape swept in at 2 minutes past 8 with the fluid, considered movement he always used, robes settling, the specific silence he brought with him spreading through the room like cold from an open window. He went to the board, wrote the day's potion, draft of living death, with 3 economical strokes of chalk, and turned. His eyes swept the room and stopped at Harry. They always stopped at Harry. Had done, every lesson, for 4 years. The pause was brief and contained an entire relationship in it, every detention and every point deducted and every deliberate public dismantling and every moment of acclimacy that had been less a lesson than an invasion. Harry held the look without expression. Snape moved on. "Today," he said, in the voice that was designed to convey that everything and everyone in this room was either a tool or an inconvenience, "we attempt the draft of living death. Most of you will fail. This is not an accusation. It is a prediction based on evidence." He began the instructions. Harry followed them, not because he needed the review but because doing the potion correctly mattered. The compact's revocation clause required the truth of the violation, and the truth was better demonstrated by Harry producing a correct potion while the revocation happened than by him sitting idle. He measured lacewing flies with the precision he'd been developing since third year, when he'd stopped letting Snape's presence make his hands uncertain. The room worked in the specific silence of a Snape classroom, which was different from normal classroom quiet. It was the silence of people trying very hard not to do anything that could be interpreted as wrong. Neville's cauldron began to smoke at 20 minutes in, the same way it always did, the same catchpoint in the same procedure that Snape could have addressed with 10 seconds of clear instruction at the beginning of the year and had instead chosen to leave as a recurring opportunity for correction. Snape moved to Neville's bench with the unhurried step of someone approaching something predetermined. He looked into Neville's cauldron. He looked at Neville. "Longbottom," he said. "What, precisely, did you do to that lacewing fly?" Neville's jaw tightened. You followed the instructions the way a flobberworm follows directions. Mechanically and without comprehension. Snape's voice was perfectly level. That was the thing about it, it never rose, never heated. Cold contempt had a different quality than hot anger, a different effect on the person receiving it. Put out the flame. You'll be watching for the remainder of the class. The smoke is normal at this stage, Harry said. The room went extremely still. Snape turned. Slowly. The turn of someone who has trained their physical reactions to communicate volumes. "I beg your pardon. The oxidation smoke in lacewing fly preparation is normal at the 20-minute mark, Harry said. It's in Advanced Potion Making, page 214, where Libacious Borage notes that it's actually an indicator of correct temperature calibration. It resolves in about 40 seconds if you leave it alone." He held Snape's eyes. "Neville's doing it right." The silence had a different texture now, not the cold silence of fear but something more charged, more awake. 20 students were very carefully not looking at anything directly. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. 5 points from Gryffindor, he said. 4, Severus Tobias Snape, Harry said. And there it was again, that quality in his voice, that reaching clarity, the thing the ring amplified that was already there. He was standing without remembering the decision to stand. Snape had gone very still. "Under the authority of the Peverell Compact," Harry said, "established in the year 963, under whose terms your teaching license was granted and in whose covenant you have been teaching since your appointment to this staff. I am revoking your license to teach magic." He pressed his thumb to the ring. Pactum negatum. The gold pulse moved through the classroom. The candles flared. Several students grabbed their desks. The smoke from Neville's cauldron dissipated in the brief brilliant second of the pulse and left Neville's draft of living death gleaming a perfect clear silver blue, which Harry noticed and thought was probably the most pointed timing the Compact had ever managed. Snape made no sound. That was what Harry would remember afterward, the difference between Umbridge's response, the stumble and the sound that wasn't a scream, and Snape's. Snape stood absolutely still. His face didn't change. His hands, held at his sides with the fingers straight, didn't move. He looked at Harry with those dark eyes, and for a moment Harry saw something that was not anger, not contempt, not the careful armored professional expression he usually maintained. It was recognition. The expression of someone who had known, for a long time, that something was coming, and had carried the expectation of it so long that its arrival felt less like a blow and more like a door finally opening. "You cannot," Snape began, and stopped himself. He started again, voice very controlled. "The grounds on which you believe you have the authority, systematic use of position to harm students. Teaching falsehood as assessment rather than identifying genuine misunderstanding. Sustained exercise of favoritism as academic policy. Creating an environment in which fear was the primary instructional tool." Harry kept his voice even. "Not cruel, he wasn't doing this to be cruel, and he needed it not to feel that way. All of those violate the Compact's conditions. All of them are documented. Not just my observations, Snape. 17 years of Hogwarts students." Snape's jaw worked very slightly. "Additionally," Harry said, "what you've been doing to Neville for 4 years is not high standards. It's targeted harm. And you knew it was. You're too smart not to have known. Neville made a small sound. Harry didn't look over. Snape was quiet for a long moment. The classroom was entirely motionless, 20 students, most of them barely breathing, watching something that was going to be part of what they told people about Hogwarts for the rest of their lives. What, Snape said, very quietly, happens to the dark arts work? The counter-curse research. He stopped. Harry understood what he was asking. The revocation didn't touch Snape's personal magic. He could still brew, still cast, still do everything he did outside the teaching framework. But his ability to instruct, to license, to convey magical knowledge in the formal context of the Compact's covenant, that was gone. Your personal magic isn't affected, Harry said. The revocation is specific to the teaching license. Something moved through Snape's face. And the other work, he said, and the emphasis on other was so slight that only someone who knew what he meant by it would catch it. His work for Dumbledore. His work as a spy. Isn't a teaching function, Harry said quietly. The Compact doesn't touch that. Snape looked at him for one more long moment. Then he looked around the classroom, at the students, at their cauldrons, at the board with the draft of living death instructions still written in his hand. He walked to his desk, picked up nothing, and walked out of the classroom. The door closed. The room held its breath for about 3 seconds. Then Draco Malfoy said, very quietly and entirely to himself, "Merlin's beard," and someone laughed, and then the dam broke and the sound of 20 students all reacting simultaneously filled the room. Harry sat back down. Neville was looking at Harry's potion and then at his own. The silver-blue shimmer of the draft of living death was fading now from Neville's cauldron, back to the correct color, the quiet luminescent silver that the textbook described. It was right. It had been right all along. Neville's hands had known what they were doing, and the smoke had been correct, and every time Snape had told him otherwise had been the thing the Compact called teaching falsehood as truth. Neville looked up and met Harry's eyes. He didn't say anything. Neither did Harry. Some things were complete without words. The rest of that day moved quickly in the way that days move when something has happened that reorganizes everything around it. Slughorn, who had been teaching defense against the dark arts since Lupin's departure and doing it adequately if not brilliantly, came to find Harry between classes with a look of acute anxiety and spent 5 minutes explaining that he had always tried to maintain positive relationships with students, had always believed in recognition of talent, had never used a blood quill or anything adjacent, and wanted to be on record as being in full support of the Compact's principles. Harry told him his license looked fine, which made Slughorn exhale with such relief that his mustache shook. McGonagall caught Harry in the corridor after dinner. She didn't slow her pace, just matched his stride for 10 seconds and said, without preamble, the Transfiguration curriculum is going to need a new approach without Snape's potions component. I'm aware. I've already drafted a solution. I don't need the ring to do my job and I never have. I know, Harry said. Good. She accelerated back to her usual pace and was gone. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment, watching her go, and felt very clearly the shape of what she was, what it looked like when someone did the job right, when the covenant was kept without needing to be enforced. The Compact wasn't needed for McGonagall. She'd been teaching under its spirit since long before the ring was on anyone's finger. He put his hand in his pocket and walked back toward the tower. Hermione fell into step beside him from the staircase. Thatch has filed a formal injunction, she said. I got it from Flitwick, who got it from Dumbledore, who got it an hour ago. Thatch is arguing to the Wisengamot that the Compact's revocation power is an anachronistic instrument of hereditary authority incompatible with modern magical governance and should be rendered inoperative pending a full review. How long does a full review take? Months. Possibly a year. During which time anyone whose license I revoke would have it effectively suspended pending the review outcome. Except the injunction also argues that revocations already made should be stayed, meaning Umbridge and Snape would be reinstated pending. No, Harry said. The Wisengamot might, The Compact's Article 11 says that revocations cannot be overturned by any authority except the ring-bearer, Harry said. Thatch knows this. He's not actually expecting the injunction to work on existing revocations. He's using it to create a legal framework for challenging future ones. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You've been reading the Compact again. Every article. Multiple times. There's something you're not telling me, she said. The granting clause. You've been building towards something with it. What does it say? Harry looked at her. They were at the portrait hole now, the fat lady watching them with the alert interest she always showed when the surrounding conversation seemed significant. The granting clause says the ring-bearer can grant new licenses, he said. Outside the ministry framework. Outside the Hogwarts appointment structure. Directly, by covenant, to anyone the ring-bearer judges to be teaching in accordance with the Compact's conditions. Hermione's eyes widened incrementally, she was doing the implications. He watched them arrive. You can create a parallel teaching authority, she said. I can create the original teaching authority, Harry said. The one everything else was built on. The Compact doesn't need Hogwarts as an institution, Hermione. Hogwarts was built under the Compact. If Thatch moves to dissolve the institution, you rebuild it from the foundation up, she said. She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts awe and the specific apprehension she reserved for plans that were both brilliant and capable of going dramatically wrong. Harry, that would completely reframe the entire legal fight. That's the idea, Harry said. You're going to need more than 3 revocations to make the point fully. I know, Harry said. I have 4 more on the list. She looked at him, then past him, at something he couldn't see. Including Dumbledore, she said quietly. Harry was quiet. His name is on the list, Hermione said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the careful laying out of a fact that required acknowledgement. His name is on the list, Harry said. The fat lady cleared her throat softly. Password, dear. Harry gave it, and the portrait swung open, and they climbed through into the noise and warmth of the common room, carrying between them the quiet weight of what was coming. The ring pulsed once, warm and certain, on Harry's finger. Chapter 4, one by one the list had 7 names on it. Umbridge and Snape were done. That left 5, and Harry had spent 3 days since the Snape revocation reading, watching, and making decisions that felt less like strategy and more like clarity, the kind that comes when you stop asking should I and start asking how. He'd told Hermione the list had 4 remaining names. That was true. He hadn't told her he'd already decided the order, the method, and the reasoning behind each one, because some decisions needed to stay inside your own head until the moment arrived and the reasons were still clean. The remaining names were, Alecto Carrow, who wasn't technically at Hogwarts yet but whose ministry appointment to the newly created position of Magical Studies Supervisor had been filed 3 weeks ago and whose license Harry could revoke preemptively under the Compact's 11th article, which allowed revocation of licenses held by individuals whose violations had already occurred at other institutions. Dolores Umbridge's deputy, a man named Aldous Runcorn who'd been quietly installed as Magical Records Keeper in the castle and who was, under his administrative title, running a surveillance operation on student mail that Umbridge had put in place before her revocation, Gilderoy Lockhart, not currently at Hogwarts, currently in St. Mungo's, but whose license was still technically active and whose years of fraudulent teaching had been documented by 12 separate former students in letters that had arrived, unasked for, after the Quibbler article, and 2 other names that Harry was still deciding how to approach. And Dumbledore. Dumbledore's name sat at the bottom of Harry's private list, written in his own handwriting, and he looked at it sometimes in the evenings and understood with complete clarity that it was the hardest one and also the most necessary. But not yet. Runcorn first, because Runcorn was operating right now, today, and the harm was immediate. Harry didn't know Runcorn personally. The man moved through the castle in the margins, attending staff meetings without being staff, occupying an office on the 3rd floor that Harry had walked past 100 times without paying attention to the nameplate. He was medium-sized, gray-haired, with the specific forgettable quality of someone who had worked very hard to cultivate it. His title was Magical Records and Correspondence Keeper, and it had the invented sound of a position created specifically to be unremarkable. Harry found him at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, in his office, in the act of reading what was very clearly a student's letter. The Hogwarts crest was visible on the parchment, and the handwriting was small and rounded, the handwriting of someone young. Runcorn had a quill in his hand and was making notes on a separate sheet. Harry opened the door without knocking. Runcorn looked up. He was not a man who showed surprise outwardly, which told Harry something. People who train their faces to stay still in unexpected situations are people who anticipate situations requiring trained stillness. "Mr. Potter," Runcorn said, with the mild neutrality of someone who'd prepared for this visit. "This is a private. Whose letter is that?" "Student correspondence is subject to. Whose letter is that?" Harry asked again, same tone, same pace. Runcorn set down his quill carefully. "Under Educational Decree 39, student correspondence is subject to inspection by authorized ministry personnel in cases where Educational Decree 39 was issued under Umbridge's authority as High Inquisitor," Harry said. "Her authority to issue educational decrees was contingent on her holding a valid teaching license. She doesn't hold one anymore. The decree is void." Runcorn's neutral expression held, but something behind it shifted, a subtle realignment, like a man putting more weight on his back foot. "The ministry's position is that the revocation of Professor Umbridge's license is pending legal review and therefore, the Wisengamot hasn't ruled on Thatch's injunction yet," Harry said. "Until they do, the revocation stands." "Put the letter down." Runcorn put the letter down. Harry looked at the pile of parchments on the desk. There were 12 of them, all student correspondence by the look of the handwriting on the visible sheets. He looked at Runcorn's notes, 2 columns, names on the left, content summaries on the right. He recognized 4 of the names. 2 were members of Dumbledore's army, which meant Runcorn had been building a list before Umbridge left, and had been continuing to build it after. "How long have you been doing this?" Harry asked. "My position was created in September. How long have you been reporting to Umbridge?" A pause. "I report to the minister. How long has the minister known about the army?" The silence that followed was the most informative thing Runcorn had said since Harry walked in. It was a silence with structure in it, a silence that was calculating something. "Aldous Cornelius Runcorn," Harry said, and the quality in his voice arrived again, clean and reaching, the ring warm on his finger. "Under the authority of the Peverell Compact, for the violation of your teaching covenant through surveillance of students under your charge, the deliberate collection of information for purposes adverse to student welfare, and the subordination of your educational function to political intelligence operations, I'm revoking your license." He pressed his thumb to the ring. Pactum negatum. The gold pulse was quieter in a small room, more concentrated, less wave and more point, like the difference between a bell and a needle. Runcorn exhaled sharply and put both hands on the desk, and his face did something complicated that it had probably never done in public before. It showed what was actually in it, briefly and involuntarily. What was there wasn't defiance. It was the expression of someone whose carefully constructed position had just been removed, and who was, underneath the gray professional surface, frightened. "The letters go back," Harry said. "Every one. Today." "I can't, you can. You're not ministry staff here anymore. You're a private citizen who was reading other people's mail. Return the letters, leave the castle, and tell Fudge what happened." He looked at the pile of parchments. "And tell him that if anyone else is installed to perform the same function, the same thing will happen to them." Runcorn stood slowly. He gathered the student letters with hands that were working hard at steadiness and not entirely achieving it, and he put them in a folder, and he picked up his cloak from the back of the chair. At the door he stopped and looked back at Harry, and the look had something in it that wasn't quite respect but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who had been preparing to fight a particular kind of opponent and had found a different kind entirely. "You're going to make a great deal of enemies," Runcorn said. "I already have a great deal of enemies," Harry said. The difference is now I'm choosing them. Runcorn left. Harry stood in the empty office for a moment, looking at the desk. The notes Runcorn had been making were still there. He picked them up and read through the content summaries. They were careful, thorough, the work of someone good at this kind of work. 2 columns, everything legible and organized. He burned them with a non-verbal incendio and left. The Caro revocation was different in every way. Alecto Caro had not yet arrived at Hogwarts. Her ministry appointment letter had been filed, her position created, her arrival scheduled for December 1st. Harry had found all of this in the paperwork Runcorn's desk had yielded after Runcorn left. The surveillance operation had apparently also been tracking staff appointments, and the file on Caro was detailed enough to be useful. Her history was documented. For years teaching at a private magical instruction academy in Yorkshire, during which time 3 students had filed formal complaints about her methods, complaints that had been filed with the ministry and marked reviewed, no action required in the margin, which was the ministry's way of losing paperwork without technically losing it. The complaints described specific classroom incidents involving deliberate magical harm, targeted harassment of Muggle-born students, and the teaching of dark spells as standard curriculum. Harry wrote to the ministry's educational licensing office under the authority of the Compact, with a formal revocation notice for Caro license and a reference to the 4 documented violations in the Yorkshire school records. He attached a copy of the relevant Compact articles, including the 11th, which allowed preemptive revocation. He sealed the letter with his wand in a way that felt formal and right, the way the ring had started making things feel, less like improvisation, more like the execution of something well designed. Then he wrote a separate letter to Thatch directly. The letter to Thatch was 3 sentences long. The Caro license has been revoked under Article 11 of the Compact. The documentation is attached. If you install another replacement at Hogwarts under similar circumstances, the same outcome will apply to them. He sent both letters with school owls, because the ministry owls would be monitored and the school owls were his best option for something that arrived without being read in transit first. Hermione, when he told her, was quiet for a moment. "You're sending formal notices to the ministry," she said. "Yes." "You're creating a paper trail." "Yes." "You want the Wisingamot to have documentation when the injunction hearing comes," she said, working through it as she spoke, the logic arriving. "You're not hiding what you're doing. You're establishing it as a legitimate process." "The Compact is a legitimate process," Harry said. "I'm not operating underground. I'm operating in daylight with documentation because that's what legitimate authority looks like and I want there to be no ambiguity about what this is." Hermione looked at him for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "I forget that you're actually very good at this." "You remember most of the time, though," Harry said. "Most of the time," she agreed, and went back to her notes. Lockhart took a different approach entirely. Harry wrote to St. Mungo's on a Wednesday afternoon, a formal Compact notice to the hospital's Administrative Records Department, revoking Lockhart's license and including the 12 student testimonies that had arrived since the Quibbler article. The testimonies ranged from mildly indignant to genuinely distressed, a woman in her 30s writing about her confidence in defensive magic being systematically undermined during what should have been her second-year defense education, a man who'd spent 3 years believing he was bad at shields because Lockhart had told him so repeatedly and with conviction, when in fact Lockhart had simply been incompetent and unwilling to acknowledge it. Harry read each testimony before attaching it to the formal notice, and he felt the specific kind of anger that came not from personal harm but from the accumulated weight of other people's harm, the harm done to all the people who'd sat in that classroom and believed what they were told, because that was what you did in school, you believed the person standing at the front of the room was there in good faith. He sent the notice. The revocation pulse would reach Lockhart wherever he was in St. Mungo's. The Compact's magic wasn't constrained by geography, just by the existence of the license. He didn't hear anything back from St. Mungo's, which was probably appropriate. Lockhart's situation was what it was. The revocation was the acknowledgement the 12 letter writers deserved, the formal record that what had been done to them had been seen and named, even years later. The fourth revocation was the quiet one. Professor Trelawney had not been on Harry's list. She'd never been on his list. But when he came down the corridor past the divination tower on Thursday afternoon and stopped because something about the ambient quality of the air made him stop the way you stop when a sound you'd been filtering out suddenly becomes audible, he stood for a moment and listened. Then he went up. The divination classroom was empty, class had finished an hour ago, but it felt occupied in the way it always did, the incense and the fabric and the warm dim light creating the impression of a space that was somehow more inhabited than the people in it. Trelawney was at the far end, sitting with her hands around a crystal ball that was definitely not performing, and she had the look she sometimes had when she wasn't performing for a class, the look of someone genuinely trying to see something and not quite reaching it. Harry sat down across from her, which made her blink rapidly and resurface. "My dear," she said, her magnified eyes finding focus, "I had a feeling, I know you're not on the list," Harry said. She blinked again. "The Compact's covenant applies to teaching licenses," Harry said, "which are issued for formal magical instruction. Your seer gift operates under a different covenant entirely, the Seer's Compact, which predates even Merlin's work." He looked at the crystal ball. "You're not here because the ministry licensed you. You're here because Dumbledore hired you and because whatever you have, whatever it is when it's real, isn't something that operates through institutional authority." Trelawney looked at him for a long moment. The performance quality was completely absent from her face, and what was there instead was something more interesting, a complicated, intelligent expression, the expression of a woman who was quite aware of the gap between what she could genuinely do and what she was required to perform daily. "You know," she said, quietly, without the theatrical waver, "most of what I teach is nonsense." "I know," Harry said. "The genuine moments," she stopped. Started again. "They come when they come. I can't call them up for a scheduled class at 3 on Thursdays. So I fill the rest with tea leaves and crystal gazing and a performance of mysticism because that's what the position requires and because I have," she paused. "I have nowhere else to go." Harry looked at her. The real her, under the scarves and the enormous glasses and the amplified persona, was a person whose actual gift was rare and real and completely ungovernable, trying to make a living in a framework built for something more reliable. "I'm not revoking your license," Harry said. "But I want you to know that if Dumbledore hadn't appointed you, if you didn't have the institutional cover, the Compact would have already recognized what you are. A seer is operating under older authority than a teacher." Trelawney was quiet for a moment. Then, in the real voice, "The boy with the lightning scar is going to do something that frightens even him." "Probably," Harry said. "I meant it as a warning." "I know. I also meant probably." Something shifted in her expression, amusement, genuine and unperformed, crossing her face briefly. "You're rather extraordinary, you know." "I've been told," Harry said, standing. "For what it's worth, Professor, the astronomy tower at midnight on the 23rd. I don't know what it means. But write it down." He left her with her crystal ball and her own expression of startled attention, and went back down the stairs, and didn't look at the ring on his finger because he hadn't needed to. Some things came naturally, with or without ancient covenants. That evening, the common room was different. Harry was aware of a shift in atmosphere that had been building all week, not tension, exactly, but a kind of charged attentiveness, the feeling of a place that knew it was inside something significant and was still deciding how to hold it. The first and second years were quieter around Harry now, in a way that wasn't fear. It was the way children go quiet around something that surprises their categories, that doesn't fit the frameworks they were given for understanding adults or authority or power. The older students were different in a different way. The fifth years had formed a habit of being nearby without crowding, present and aware, available without being asked. It was the same quality that had appeared in Dumbledore's army at its best moments, the esprit that came from people who had found each other through shared purpose rather than sordid assignment. Harry sat at the back table with Hermione and Ron and the remains of a chess game that Ron had won and was politely pretending he hadn't. Luna was there again, the fat lady had clearly reached a new understanding, sitting cross-legged on the window seat with a Nargle diagram that she was annotating with complete serenity. 2 left, Ron said, not looking up from the board. 2 that are actually decided, Harry said. And 1 that's, Dumbledore, Ron said. I know. Are you ready for that one? Harry thought about the question seriously, which Ron always deserved. I know what the compact says about him. I know which conditions he's violated. I know the reasoning. That's not what I asked, Ron said. Harry looked at him. Ron was watching him with his head slightly tilted, brown eyes direct and unreadable in the specific way that meant he was being precise about something, not casual. He loves you, Ron said. In his way. That's the thing that makes it complicated. People can love you and still violate the covenant they agreed to, Harry said. I know. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm asking if you're ready for the fact that it's going to hurt even when it's right. Harry was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I'm ready for that. Ron nodded and moved a rook. Hermione was looking at Harry over her notes. There's something else, she said. Thatch's injunction hearing has been scheduled. 2 weeks from Friday, Wisengamot full chamber. I know. Harry, the full chamber. I know what it is. We'll need to present the compact formally. The actual document. In front of the entire Wisengamot. She was doing the thing she did when she was deciding how much to say. Fudge will be there. The entire court. If Thatch has built his argument the way I think he has, he's going to argue that the compact's revocation power creates an unaccountable concentration of authority in the hands of one individual, and he'll be right, Harry said. Hermione stopped. He's right about that, Harry said. That's the argument I'd make if I were him. It's correct. Having one person hold this much authority over magical education is a legitimate structural concern. He looked at the ring. Which is why the granting clause matters. I've been thinking about how to use it. You've been thinking about it for 2 weeks and you haven't told me the plan, Hermione said, in a tone that was more diagnostic than accusatory. Because the plan requires Dumbledore's revocation to happen first. And I needed to be sure about the revocation before I built the plan on it. Hermione looked at him for a long time. Luna, from the window seat, said without looking up from her diagram, he's going to restructure the entire covenant framework of magical education in Britain. Ron looked at Luna. How do you know that? The Nargles told me, Luna said serenely. She means she figured it out, Harry said. Luna, don't explain it yet. I need Dumbledore first. Luna made a small note on her diagram and hummed agreement. Friday morning came with fog. The castle was muffled in it, the grounds invisible beyond the first-floor windows, the great lake absent from the landscape entirely, as if the world beyond the walls had simplified itself to grey. Harry walked the corridors after breakfast with his hands in his pockets and the deliberate unhurried pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was not anxious about getting there. He was going to find Quirinus Quirrell. Quirrell was on the list for reasons that had nothing to do with his arrangement with Voldemort, that was a matter for a different kind of authority, and everything to do with what his first-year teaching had cost the students who'd passed through it. A year of defense against the dark arts from a man who was actively working against his students' ability to defend themselves, who had taught genuine misinformation about dark creature threat assessment, who had sabotaged practical exercises to prevent students from developing skills he didn't want them to have. 3 students that Harry knew of had gone into their second year with fundamental gaps in basic defensive knowledge because of Quirrell's curriculum design, gaps that had caused genuine harm in subsequent years. Quirrell was back at Hogwarts. Harry had been surprised by this, initially, until he understood the Ministry's reasoning. After the investigation following the Philosopher's Stone incident had concluded that Quirrell had been acting under compulsion, he'd been quietly reinstated at minimal duties, library assistance, administrative support, because the Ministry needed a narrative in which Voldemort's return wasn't real, and the coercion framing of Quirrell's behavior was structurally necessary to that narrative. He was a living prop in someone else's story. Harry found him in the library's reference section, reshelving books with the careful movements of someone who found comfort in small, controllable tasks. He looked up when Harry came around the shelf, and the expression on his face was layered: recognition, anxiety, something else that took Harry a second to identify. Guilt. Not the operatic guilt of someone who needed to perform it. Just the quiet, persistent guilt of someone who knew precisely what they'd done and had been living with the knowledge for 4 years. "Mr. Potter," Quirrell said. "Professor," Harry said, which made Quirrell flinch slightly. I'm not in a teaching capacity," Quirrell said. "Not anymore." I know. You're in a library capacity." Harry stopped a few feet away. "I need to tell you something." Quirrell waited, a book still in his hands. 3 students from your first-year class went into their second year without being able to perform a basic shield charm, Harry said. "Not because they weren't capable. Because the curriculum you designed left it out. Strategically. Susan Bones took 2 years to rebuild the foundation she should have had from your class. Seamus Finnegan didn't figure out what was missing until 4th year and had to reteach himself. Justin Finch-Fletchley can't cast Protego to this day and doesn't know why." Quirrell's hands were very still on the book. "You know this," Harry said. "Yes," Quirrell said quietly. "I'm revoking your license," Harry said. "Not because of what happened in the 3rd-floor corridor. You were in a situation that I don't fully understand and I'm not in a position to judge everything about it. I'm revoking it because of the curriculum. Because of what you deliberately taught wrong to 11-year-olds who trusted you." Quirrell looked at him. "It won't," he said carefully, "bring back what they lost." "No," Harry said. "But it means someone else won't lose it too, if you're ever considered for a teaching position again." Which someone was apparently considering. He'd found that in Runcorn's files too, a note about Quirrell being assessed for full reinstatement the following year. The revocation goes on the Compact's permanent record. Anyone checking license history will see it. Quirrell nodded once, very slowly. "Pactum negatum," Harry said quietly, his thumb on the ring, and the pulse was the quietest yet, barely a flicker of gold, almost private, because this wasn't a revocation that needed to be seen by anyone. It just needed to be done. Quirrell put the book on the shelf. His hands were steady. "For what it's worth," he said, without looking at Harry, I have been, trying to understand what I am, after what happened. What I am capable of being." "I can't answer that for you," Harry said. "But you know what you did to those students. You could write to them." Quirrell was quiet. "Explaining what was deliberately left out of the curriculum," Harry said. "Not apologizing, necessarily. Just filling in the gap. Telling them what they should have been taught." He left Quirrell in the reference section, standing very still beside a shelf of books, and walked back out into the fog. That afternoon, a second letter came from Sirius, shorter than the first. "The night is covering a lot of ground. Watch for the Queen's Gambit, they'll try to use sentiment against you. Don't let love make you slow. The old man especially. You know what I mean. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you in a way I can't say plainly because it would embarrass us both. Also Fred and George want to know if the ring can revoke ministry licenses for magical business interference. Tell them no. I've already told them no. Tell them anyway." Harry read it twice, put it in his pocket, and smiled for the second time in a week. He found McGonagall that evening in her office, grading Transfiguration essays with the focused precision of someone who found the work restorative. She looked up when he knocked and sat back in her chair with an expression that said she'd been expecting this visit for several days. "Sit down, Harry," she said. He sat. She looked at the ring on his finger for a moment. Not at him, at the ring, with an expression of recognition that he hadn't expected. "You know what it is," he said. "I suspected what it was when I was 26 years old," she said. "There was a situation with a member of staff that needed, the kind of authority it represents." She paused. "The chamber door was sealed then. I found the door but I couldn't open it." Harry looked at her. Who was the staff member? McGonagall was quiet for a moment. It doesn't matter now. They're dead. The harm they caused was real, and it was not addressed properly, and I have lived with that. She met Harry's eyes directly. I'm telling you this so you understand that I do not have complicated feelings about what you're doing. I know exactly what it's for. I need to ask you something, Harry said. Ask. When I'm finished, when the revocations are done, and the Wisengamot hearing happens, I need someone who understands the Compact's terms, who has decades of teaching experience, and who the rest of the staff will trust when things have to be rebuilt. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to be loyal to me. I'm asking you to be what you already are. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. What you're describing, she said carefully, sounds like something that will fundamentally change the structure of this school. Yes, Harry said. That's what it is. She picked up her quill. Put it down. There is one name on your list we haven't discussed, she said. I know. He's going to know you're coming, she said. He knows everything that happens in this castle. He's known since the first revocation. I know that too. Harry. Her voice was different now, not the Professor McGonagall voice, not the Deputy Headmistress voice. Something older and more direct. Whatever he's done, whatever the Compact says about it, he loves you. That's real. And I think you know that it's going to be real in the room with you when it happens, and you're going to have to hold the truth of what he's violated while also holding the truth of what he is to you, and that's, she stopped. That's not easy. Ron said something similar, Harry said. Ronald is occasionally remarkably perceptive. Don't tell him that. The corner of her mouth moved. Go to bed, Harry. You'll need your sleep. He stood. At the door he paused and said, without turning around, for the record, Professor. Your license. I've read every condition in the Compact twice. You've violated none of them. A brief silence. Good night, Harry, McGonagall said, in a voice that was very steady. He walked back up through the castle, through the fog-muffled quiet of the late evening, past the portraits of people who had built this place and the suits of armor that had watched it change and the staircases that moved to places logic hadn't suggested, carrying in his chest the warm glow of the ring and the steady ember that had been burning since October and the clear, certain knowledge of what came next. One more before the Wisengamot. The one that would cost the most and matter the most and change the most. And then the hearing, and the granting clause, and what came after. The fog outside the windows was beginning to thin. Through gaps in the grey, stars were visible. Harry looked up at them through a fourth-floor window and stood still for a moment, one hand on the stone wall and the ring on his finger and the castle breathing quietly around him. He was ready. Chapter 5, The Last License. Harry went to see Dumbledore on a Sunday. He chose Sunday deliberately, not because it was strategic, but because it was honest. Sunday was a day without classes, without the structure that the school week used to define relationships and roles. It was the day when Dumbledore was most simply himself, when the headmaster function was least in operation, and Harry wanted to have this conversation with the man rather than the title. He didn't send a note ahead. He walked up the spiral staircase to the gargoyle at 9:30 in the morning, said the password, fizzing whiz-bees, which he'd gotten from McGonagall's expression when he'd asked if she knew it, that slight pause that meant she did, and rode the moving stair up to the office door. He knocked twice and went in. Dumbledore was at his desk, but not working. He was sitting with both hands folded around a cup of tea, looking out the window at the November grounds, the lake just visible through the mist, the bare trees at the edge of the forest standing against a sky the color of old pewter. He turned when Harry entered, and his expression was not surprised. It was the expression of someone who had been waiting, who had decided to wait rather than prevent, and who found the arrival both expected and waited. "Harry," he said. "Sit down." Harry sat. The office was warm, the usual ambient motion of its instruments continuing around them, small rotations, quiet measures, the soft sounds of things being carefully kept track of. Fawkes was on his perch and watched Harry with bright, still eyes. For a moment neither of them said anything. "You know why I'm here," Harry said. "I have known since the first morning," Dumbledore said. "Since you stood in the Great Hall and used the ring for the first time and I looked at your face and understood that you had read the compact in its entirety before you acted." "I read it 4 times. "Yes." Dumbledore looked at the ring on Harry's finger. "I sealed the chamber in 1964 because I was afraid. I have told you this. What I didn't tell you was the other reason." He was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid for myself." Harry looked at him. "I have held this post for 31 years, Dumbledore said. In that time I have made decisions about this school, about its students, about you in particular, that I justified to myself as protective. As necessary. As the carefully managed difference between what people needed to know and what it was safe for them to know." He looked down at his tea. "I told myself the management was care. I told myself the distance was strategy. I told myself that keeping you uninformed about the prophecy, about your own nature, about the full truth of your situation, was a form of love." "It wasn't," Harry said. "Not harshly. Just clearly." "No," Dumbledore said. "It was fear. Fear that if you knew too much too soon, you would make choices I couldn't control. And I wanted to control the choices because I believed, I still believe, in some version of myself, that my judgment about the larger picture was better than yours." He looked at Harry directly. "The truth is that my management of you, from the time you arrived at this school, has served my strategic interests as much as your welfare. I have used you, Harry. Not cruelly, not without affection, but I have used you. And I have known, for at least 2 years, that what I was doing fell within the terms the compact would identify as a violation." The room was very still. Harry had prepared for many versions of this conversation. He had prepared for defensiveness, for the gentle deflection of a man who had decades of practice making his positions sound like wisdom. He had prepared for Dumbledore to invoke the greater good, the phrase Harry had found in the compact's historical record, scrawled in a 15th-century margin note as an example of the kind of reasoning that justified the subordination of student welfare to other interests. He had not fully prepared for this. For Dumbledore to simply say it. "The prophecy," Harry said. "Yes. You knew it when I was 1 year old," Harry said. "You've known for 14 years that it was about me and you've known since the graveyard that Voldemort knows it too and you haven't told me what it says." "No. That's the central violation," Harry said. "Teaching falsehood as truth. Except in your case it's more specific, it's withholding the truth that is most necessary for me to have in order to make real choices about my own life." Dumbledore nodded very slowly. "You've been making choices on my behalf," Harry said, "using information I wasn't allowed to have, for 15 years. That's, in the compact's language, the subordination of my welfare to your strategic interests. Because your interest was in controlling the situation. In managing the board." He looked at the ring. "And you're the one who taught me to think of it as chess." "I did," Dumbledore said. "The problem with chess," Harry said, "is that the pieces don't choose." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were bright in a way that Harry had seen only twice before, at the end of the Triwizard Tournament, after the graveyard, when Dumbledore had looked at Harry with an expression of grief so complete it had no space for management. "And now?" "No," Dumbledore said quietly. "They don't." Harry stood. "I'm going to tell you the compact's terms before I invoke them," Harry said. "Not because I'm asking permission. Because you deserve to hear them clearly." Dumbledore nodded, his hands still folded around the cooling tea. "You've violated the condition against withholding truth necessary for student welfare," Harry said. "You've violated the condition against subordinating student welfare to external strategic interests. You've violated the condition against using your position to manage rather than protect those in your charge." He paused. "Those are the 3 I can establish with documented evidence. There may be others, but those are the ones I'm prepared to stand behind in front of the Wisengamot. You are correct on all three, Dumbledore said. I know I'm correct, Harry said. I'm not telling you to argue the case. I'm telling you because, he stopped. Found the words carefully. Because you've been my teacher since I was 11 years old. Because you're the reason I knew what was real and what was manipulation in the graveyard. Because whatever the violations are, you're also the reason I survived long enough to stand here and hold this ring. He looked at Dumbledore directly. Both things are true. I'm not revoking your license because I hate you or because I want to punish you. I'm revoking it because the compact is real and your violations are real and because the ring on my finger exists precisely for situations where the most powerful person in the room is also the one who needs to be held accountable. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Tell me, he said, very quietly. The prophecy. Before you, tell me. Have you worked out what it says? Not exactly, Harry said. But I know it says I have to be the one who acts against Voldemort. And I know it says that I have power he doesn't understand. And I know that the reason you've been keeping it from me isn't because the information would break me. It's because you're afraid that if I know the full weight of it, I'll make choices that take it out of your hands. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, you are more right than I would like. Tell me the whole prophecy, Harry said. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Dumbledore said, and his voice was very steady and very old, the voice of someone reciting something they have carried for a long time, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. He paused. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. Another pause. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies. Harry stood with it. The prophecy was exactly what he'd suspected it was, in structure and in weight, but hearing it spoken in Dumbledore's voice in this room made it real in a different way than suspected knowledge. It became a thing that had been carried for 14 years, by this man, alone, and Harry felt the weight of that carrying even as he felt the rage of having been excluded from it. Either must die at the hand of the other, Harry said. Yes. So the endgame is real. Yes. And you thought, Harry said, slowly, that if I knew that I'd run. Or break. Or make a choice about my own life that you didn't think I'd make correctly. I thought, Dumbledore said, with the careful precision of someone being completely honest probably for the first time in years, that you were too young, and then that the timing was wrong, and then that the additional weight of it might compromise your ability to function, and then, he stopped. Then I ran out of justifications and I still didn't tell you, and the reason was simpler than all of those. I didn't tell you because telling you made it real in a way I could no longer manage. And I have spent a great deal of energy on management. I know, Harry said. He put his thumb on the ring. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, he said, and his voice had the quality it always had when the ring was engaged, clear, reaching, present. The full name, all four parts, because this was the last one and it mattered to do it completely. Under the authority of the Peverell Compact, established in the year 963, in whose covenant your teaching license was granted and by whose conditions you have taught in this school for 31 years, I'm revoking your license to teach magic. He pressed his thumb to the ring. Pactum negatum. The pulse that moved through the office was different from all the others. It wasn't the broad wave of the Great Hall. It wasn't the concentrated point of Runcorn's small office. It was something between and beyond both, deep and resonant and warm, the way old things that have been waiting for a specific completion feel when they arrive at it. Every instrument in the office chimed once, a single clear note, all of them the same note. Fawkes spread his wings and held them open for 3 seconds, shimmering, then folded them back. The portraits on the walls stirred, all of them at once, former headmasters leaning forward in their frames. Dumbledore's eyes closed. When he opened them, something had changed in his face. Not collapse, not defeat, not the devastation Harry had been bracing for. Something more complex and more final, the expression of a man who has put down something very heavy after carrying it for a long time, and is deciding how to feel about the lightness. Well, he said softly. The revocation is specific to the teaching license, Harry said. Your role as headmaster is administrative, not covered by the compact unless you choose to use it for instruction. Your personal magic is unaffected. Your position with the order is unaffected. And, he paused. The work you've been doing to prepare defenses against Voldemort. That's unaffected. You've thought about what I would want to know, Dumbledore said. Yes. Dumbledore stopped. Started again. That is characteristic of you. It's characteristic of someone who read the document carefully before they used it. Dumbledore made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. It was the sound of a man who was somewhere just past laughter, in the territory where grief and relief live together and can't be told apart. May I ask what comes next, he said. The Wisengamot hearing, Harry said. Thatch's injunction. Friday. And after the hearing? Harry looked at the ring on his finger. I'm going to rebuild what got broken, he said. He took the stairs back down slowly, not because he was tired but because he needed the transition, the space between the conversation he just had and the one he was about to have with himself about how it felt. It felt exactly like Ron had said it would feel. Right and costly at the same time, the two things sitting side by side without canceling each other out. He'd told the truth about what Dumbledore was, the care and the violation and the love that was real and the management that was also real, and those two things didn't resolve into something simple when you put them together. They just existed, both completely true, both requiring acknowledgement. He stood for a moment in the corridor outside the gargoyle, one hand on the stone wall, the ring warm on his finger, and let it sit. Then he walked back toward the tower. Hermione was waiting. Not in the corridor, not in the common room, she was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase that led up to the boys' dormitories with a book in her lap that she was not reading, because she'd heard him come through the portrait hole and put the book down and looked up with the expression of someone who has been composing themselves for a significant conversation. Harry sat down on the step beside her. He told her what had happened. All of it, not the strategic parts, not the legal architecture, but what had actually happened in the room. The tea. The window. Dumbledore saying I was afraid for myself. The prophecy, spoken aloud finally, all of it. When he finished, Hermione was quiet for a moment. He told you the prophecy, she said. Yes. He just told you. Yes. She looked at the floor. He's been carrying that since you were a baby, she said, and her voice was careful and complicated, the voice she used when she was feeling something she hadn't given herself permission to feel yet. Knowing what it meant and not, I'm not excusing what he did. I'm not. But, it's both things, Harry said. I know. Are you all right? Harry thought about the question honestly. I'm going to be, he said. I think right now I'm, in between. The thing that needed to happen has happened and now I need to figure out what comes after it. The hearing is in 5 days, Hermione said. I know. Thatch is going to make the best argument he can. He's intelligent and he's prepared and he has the weight of institutional legitimacy behind him. I know that too. Harry. She turned to look at him. What's the granting clause plan? I need to know. Not to argue with it, I'm past arguing with you on things you've thought through. I need to know so I can build the legal framework around it. Harry looked at her. Then he reached into his robes and pulled out a folded sheet of parchment that he'd been carrying for 4 days, since the night after the Snape revocation, since he'd sat up past midnight with the compact unrolled on his bed and worked through the granting clause in its entirety and understood what it was saying. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. Read it. Her eyes moved quickly down the page, then slowed, then stopped at the bottom. She read the last section twice. Then she lowered the parchment and looked at Harry with an expression he had never seen on Hermione Granger's face before, an expression that required a moment to identify because it was the confluence of several things: the intellectual recognition of something elegant, the emotional weight of something significant, and underneath both of them a kind of wonder that she didn't often let herself have. "Harry," she said. "I know," he said. If you do this, this permanently restructures the entire system. That's the point. It can't be undone. Also the point." She looked at the parchment again. "You're going to need her to agree," she said. "You can't do this part unilaterally. The granting clause requires consent." "I know. I'm going to ask." "When?" "Tonight," Harry said. "If she'll see me." Hermione folded the parchment and handed it back. "She'll see you," she said. "She's been waiting for you to ask since about the second week of term." McGonagall was in her office at 9 in the evening, which Harry had expected. She was writing something at her desk, not essays, he thought. Correspondence. She looked up when he knocked and her expression shifted through several registers in quick succession before settling on the one she used when she was making a decision about how to approach something she already knew the answer to. "Sit down," she said. Harry sat. He told her the plan. He laid it out completely: the Wisengamot hearing, Thatch's argument, the response he intended to make, and the role the granting clause would play in it. He placed the parchment on her desk. She read it without picking it up, leaning forward slightly, her hands flat on the desk on either side of it. When she finished reading she sat back and looked at him for a long moment. "The compact allows this," she said. Not a question. She'd read enough of the document to know the answer. "Article 13, Harry said. "The ring-bearer can grant a teaching license to any individual they judge to be teaching under the compact's conditions, regardless of institutional appointment or ministry approval. The license, once granted, operates under the compact's direct protection, which means the ministry can't revoke it, can't restrict it, can't condition it." "And you want to grant one to me," she said. "I want to grant you a compact license," Harry said. "But not just a teaching license." McGonagall looked at him. "The compact's 13th article has a second provision," Harry said. "One that hasn't been used since the compact was first enacted. The ring-bearer can designate a compact warden, a person who holds the compact's authority in the ring-bearer's absence or when the ring-bearer is a student rather than an independent adult. The warden doesn't hold the ring. But they hold the authority to grant and review licenses under the ring-bearer's covenant." The room was very still. "You'd be sharing the ring's authority," McGonagall said carefully. "Distributing it," Harry said. "Which is different. The ring stays with me. But the practical authority, the day-to-day administration of the compact's covenant in this school, would rest with the warden." He looked at her steadily. "It solves Thatch's argument. He says it's unaccountable hereditary authority concentrated in one person. A warden system distributes it. Creates accountability. Requires the ring-bearer to designate someone whose record under the compact is clean." "Someone like me," she said. "Someone exactly like you," Harry said. McGonagall was quiet for a long time. She looked at the parchment. She looked at the ring. She looked at Harry with an expression that had stripped itself down to something very direct: no professional composure, no deputy headmistress reserve, just Minerva McGonagall looking at a 15-year-old boy who had come to her office on a Sunday evening to offer her something no one had been offered in over 1,000 years. "I need to ask you something first," she said. "Ask." "Dumbledore," she said. "How did it go?" "He told me the prophecy," Harry said. "He said he'd been afraid and that he'd used me. He didn't fight the revocation." McGonagall closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them they were bright. "That sounds like him," she said. "The true version of him." "Yes," Harry said. "He'll be all right," she said, and it was said as much to herself as to Harry. "He has survived worse kinds of losing than this." "I know." She looked at the parchment one more time. The warden designation has to happen before the hearing, she said. Friday morning, Harry said. Before we leave for London. McGonagall nodded very slowly, decisively, the nod of someone who has made a decision and is done deliberating about it. Then yes, she said. I'll do it. The days between Sunday and Friday had a different quality than the previous weeks. The castle knew something was coming, not in the dramatic sense, not with ominous signs, but in the way a place knows when the people in it have committed to something. There was a steadiness in the corridors, a quality of purpose that Harry felt in the way people moved around him. Neville came to Harry on Tuesday and said, very simply, Dumbledore. Yes, Harry said. Neville nodded. His expression was complicated. Neville had different reasons than Harry for his relationship with Dumbledore, different history, the history of parents who had been broken trying to protect what Dumbledore's war had made necessary. Was it the right thing? He asked. Yes, Harry said. Okay, Neville said, and that was that. Luna found Harry in the library on Wednesday, sat across from him, and said nothing for about 20 minutes. Then she said, my mother was a brilliant witch, in a tone that was conversational but not casual. She was working on an experimental charm when she died. She wasn't teaching, she was researching, but she believed very strongly that there was no meaningful difference between learning and being taught well. She paused. I think about that sometimes when I think about what makes a teacher. It's not the license. The license is just the record of the thing. The thing being? Harry asked. The decision to be honest about what you know and what you don't, Luna said. My mother was never dishonest about the edge of her knowledge. She just pushed past it, and sometimes that was dangerous. She tilted her head. But she would have had a clean record with the compact. Harry looked at her. Luna, do you want to be at the hearing? I've already written to my father, she said. He's bringing his press credentials. Thursday evening, Harry sat in the common room with Ron and Hermione and the chessmen and let himself be just that, a 15-year-old in a common room, not a ring-bearer, not a Peverell heir, just Harry, watching Ron think 3 moves ahead and Hermione read with her feet tucked under her on the chair. The fire was warm. The room was loud and ordinary and full of the specific comfort of people being unremarkable together. Scared? Ron asked, not looking up from the board. No, Harry said. Nervous? Harry considered the distinction. A little, he said. About Thatch. He's good. He's going to make the argument well. Hermione will counter it, Ron said. Hermione is 15, Harry said. Hermione has been ready for this since she was 11, Ron said. The age is just a number. You of all people should know that. Hermione looked up from her book. I'm not going to argue that point, she said. But thank you, Ron. Don't thank me, it's true. Harry moved a bishop. Ron moved a knight. The knight looked briefly at Harry with the specific expression of chess pieces that understood the game better than the players. After tomorrow, Ron said, what happens? It depends on the Wisengamot, Harry said. No it doesn't, Ron said. What happens after tomorrow regardless of the Wisengamot? Harry thought about it. The school keeps running, he said. With a warden instead of a single ring-bearer making all the decisions. With teachers who hold direct compact licenses. With a framework that doesn't depend on the ministry's approval. And Voldemort, Ron said quietly. And Voldemort, Harry said. That's still what it is. The ring doesn't change the prophecy. It just means I'm not navigating toward it blind and managed. Good, Ron said simply. He moved another piece. Check. Harry looked at the board. The king was cornered, but not finished, there was a move. There was always a move if you looked at the whole board instead of just the threat. He found it and made it. Friday morning came clear and cold. Harry was up at 6. He dressed carefully, which he didn't normally do, the ring on his right hand, his wand in his left inside his robes, the compact in its scroll tucked inside his jacket in the way it had been since he first found it. He looked at himself in the dormitory mirror for a moment, which he also didn't normally do. He looked older than 15. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make anyone do a double take. But in the way someone looks when they've carried something heavy for a while and the carrying has settled into their posture, made itself a part of how they stood. He went down to the common room. McGonagall was already there, which was not something that happened in the normal course of Hogwarts mornings. She was standing near the fireplace in her traveling robes, the dark green ones she wore on formal occasions, and she looked at Harry when he came down the stairs with an expression of complete readiness. "Now," Harry said. "Now," she agreed. He stood across from her and took the compact from inside his jacket and unrolled it to the 13th article. He found the warden designation clause and read it through one last time, carefully, the way he read everything before he did it. Then he looked at McGonagall. "Under the authority of the Peverell Compact," Harry said, "I designate Minerva Isabel McGonagall as Compact Warden, holder of the Compact's operational authority, license reviewer, and covenant guardian for Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This designation is made freely, in full judgment, by the ring-bearer." He pressed his thumb to the ring and held it out toward her, the way the Compact's 13th article described, the ring-bearer's hand extended, open, the pulse moving outward as offering rather than revocation. Custos pactum. The gold was different this time. Not a pulse but a flow, warm and sustained, moving from Harry's hand to McGonagall like light through water. McGonagall's expression didn't change but her eyes did, they brightened with the same quality Fawkes' wings had held for those 3 seconds in Dumbledore's office, something ancient and certain arriving. It lasted about 5 seconds. When it ended, McGonagall straightened slightly, the way people straighten when they put on something that fits perfectly. She looked at Harry with those bright eyes. "Well," she said, which was apparently the Hogwarts staff's word for moments that exceeded their usual vocabulary. "That is, different from the revocation," Harry said. "Yes. It feels like," she stopped. "It feels like the castle," she said finally. "Like the way the castle feels when you've been here long enough." "That's probably right," Harry said. Behind them, the portrait hole opened and Ron and Hermione climbed through, Hermione carrying 2 bags and the expression of someone prepared for battle, Ron carrying 3 pieces of toast and looking alert. Luna came through after them. "She's coming," Harry said to McGonagall. "Obviously she is," McGonagall said. Luna offered McGonagall a piece of toast. McGonagall took it. They went down to the entrance hall together, the 5 of them, while the castle woke around them and the morning light came through the high windows and lay in long gold angles across the stone floor. They went out the front doors into the cold November air and walked toward the Hogwarts gates, where the Hogwarts carriages were waiting to take them to Hogsmeade and the London connection. Harry walked with his hands in his pockets and the ring warm on his finger and the compact against his chest and the clear, cold morning sky above the castle, and felt something he'd been building toward for 4 months without quite knowing what it would feel like when he arrived at it. It felt like being ready. Not invincible, not beyond danger, not finished with the hard things. The prophecy was still real, Voldemort was still real, the Wizengamot hearing was in 2 hours and Thatch was intelligent and well prepared. None of that was resolved. None of it was simple. But he was not going into it managed or blind or alone. He was going in as himself, fully, completely, with all the cards on the table including the ones he'd spent 15 years being told were too dangerous to hold. He looked at the castle once before the gate. Hogwarts looked back at him the way it always had, ancient and complex and slightly crooked in places, built from something older than its stones. It had held this ring in its basement for 1,000 years, kept it sealed and waiting, let a door open on the night when the thing it was waiting for arrived. It knew what it was doing. Harry turned and walked through the gate. Chapter 6, The Compact renewed. The Wizengamot chamber was older than the ministry building that housed it. That was the first thing Harry noticed when they brought him in through the side entrance. The chamber itself was older, stone-built where the surrounding ministry corridors were marble and gilt, the ceiling vaulted and low in the way of rooms that were designed to hold something important rather than impress visitors. The tiered wooden benches curved in a horseshoe around the central floor, each seat occupied by a Wisengamot member in plum-colored robes, and the combined weight of their attention was a physical thing, the way the attention of large assemblies always is. You feel it on your skin before you locate its source. Harry had been here before. He'd sat in the accused chair in this room 14 months ago, the chair with the chains, in the center of the floor, and answered questions about a Patronus charm while Fudge had tried to have him expelled. He remembered the feeling of it, the smallness, the specific vulnerability of a child in an adult institution that has decided to use its size against them. He was not in the accused chair today. He was at the advocate's table, a long oak surface facing the chamber's center, and he had Hermione on his left and McGonagall on his right, and across the chamber's central floor at the opposing table was Corvin Thatch, with 2 ministry solicitors flanking him and a very organized arrangement of parchments in front of him. Thatch was already watching Harry when Harry found his eyes across the room. He nodded once, without hostility, the nod of a serious opponent who respects the board if not the position. Harry nodded back. Fudge was in the Chief Warlock's seat, Dumbledore's usual seat, which was normally occupied by Dumbledore and which Fudge was currently using in his role as minister with the specific body language of a man who was sitting somewhere he believed he belonged and was covering a slight uncertainty about whether he was right. He looked at Harry with an expression that had several components: political anxiety, personal dislike, and underneath both of them a genuine uncertainty about what was happening and how bad it was going to get. The chamber was full. Every bench occupied. Harry saw faces he recognized in the upper tiers, older members, ministry officials, 2 people who were almost certainly journalists by the quality of their attention and the quills hovering beside them. In the gallery above the main chamber, behind a low balustrade, were observers, and Harry saw Luna in the front row of the gallery, sitting beside a tall man with wild blonde hair and an expression of tremendous professional excitement that was unmistakably Xenophilius Lovegood. Rita Skeeter was 2 seats from him, quill extended, watching Harry with the specific quality of focus she reserved for situations she believed were going to generate significant copy. Harry sat down. "Ready?" Hermione murmured. "Yes," Harry said. The doors opened one more time and Dumbledore came in. He had not been invited, or rather, he had been invited in his capacity as Hogwarts headmaster, which the summons assumed was still in full operational status, and which was true in the administrative sense even after the revocation. He walked to the headmaster's designated seat in the chamber's right tier, a specific bench reserved for Hogwarts leader, indicating the school's relationship with the Wisengamot, and sat with the unhurried composure of someone who had decided exactly how they were going to carry themselves today. He did not look at Harry. Harry watched him for a moment and understood. Dumbledore was here as a witness, as the headmaster of record, and he was going to conduct himself with complete professional dignity, which was the only form of loyalty he had left to offer and which he was offering it fully. Fudge called the chamber to order. Thatch rose first, because the injunction was his motion and the procedure was his to open. He had the quality of a man who had been in this room many times before, comfortable with the space, unhurried, his voice calibrated for the acoustics in a way that suggested practice rather than performance. He spread his hands on the table, looked around the tiered benches, and began. "Members of the Wisengamot," he said, "the motion before this chamber today concerns a question of foundational importance to the governance of magical Britain. Not the question of whether Dolores Umbridge used improper methods, she did, and that is a separate matter, and I want to be clear that the ministry does not dispute the documented testimonies." He paused, and Harry noted the strategy immediately. By conceding Umbridge up front, Thatch was separating his argument from her, removing the easiest emotional target. "The question before us is whether a single individual, specifically a 15-year-old student, however remarkable, should hold unchecked, unaccountable, unreviewable authority over the teaching licenses of every magical educator in Britain." He let that sit for a moment. "The Peverell Compact," Thatch continued, "is a genuine historical document. We have verified this. Its covenant magic is real and active. We have verified this too." He picked up a parchment. What we are contesting is the Compact's continued operative authority in modern magical Britain, specifically, its claim to supersede the Ministry's educational governance framework, and its grant of unilateral revocation power to its ring-bearer. He walked through the argument methodically: the development of democratic magical governance since the Compact's drafting, the establishment of the Wisingamat as a representative body, the educational administration acts that had built modern British magical schooling. He was thorough and he was precise, and he made the argument that Harry had anticipated him making, the argument Harry had been building a response to for 2 weeks. He was also, Harry noticed, careful not to make the argument personal. He didn't attack Harry directly. He attacked the structural problem of hereditary authority, the abstraction, not the boy. It was either generous or strategic, and probably both. When Thatch sat down, Fudge nodded at Harry's table. The respondent may address the chamber. Hermione stood. There was a murmur from the benches, not hostile, just the instinctive response of a room full of adults confronted with the sight of a 15-year-old girl rising to address the Wisingamat. Hermione waited for it to settle with the patience of someone who had been the youngest person in serious academic situations since she was 11 and had learned to treat the waiting as productive thinking time. "Members of the Wisingamat," she said, and her voice was completely steady, precisely calibrated for the room, better calibrated than most adults would have managed. "Deputy Director Thatch has made an intelligent and good faith argument, and I want to acknowledge that before I take it apart." Another murmur, different quality this time. Several members in the upper tiers leaned forward slightly. She walked through the 4 precedents she'd found in the Wisingamat's own records, for cases from the 14th and 15th centuries in which the Compact's authority had been invoked and upheld by the Wisingamat itself. She quoted directly, with dates and case references. She cited the founding charter of the Ministry of Magic, which Harry hadn't read but which Hermione had, and which contained, buried in its 16th article, in language so technical it had apparently been overlooked for centuries, an explicit acknowledgement that the Ministry's educational authority was derived from and subsidiary to the pre-existing covenant structures of magical Britain. The Ministry, Hermione said, did not create magical education in Britain. It inherited it, from a covenant structure that predates it by 9 centuries. The Educational Administration Acts are built on that foundation. You cannot argue that the foundation is invalid by using arguments that depend on the structures built upon it. She paused. "However," she said, and her voice shifted, still steady, but carrying something additional now, something that was almost excitement, the voice she used when she arrived at the part of the argument she'd been building toward from the start. "The Deputy Director raises a legitimate concern. He argues that unilateral hereditary authority is a structural problem. He is correct." She looked at the benches. "Which is why the ring-bearer has already addressed it." She sat down. Harry stood up. The room was very quiet. He didn't walk through any legal architecture. He didn't need to, Hermione had done that. He had one thing to do, and it was to say it clearly. "The Compact's 13th article," he said, "grants the ring-bearer the authority to designate a warden. A warden holds the Compact's operational authority, license review, granting, administration, under the ring-bearer's covenant, with full accountability to the Compact's terms. The warden system distributes the authority that Deputy Director Thatch correctly identifies as a structural concern." He looked at Thatch directly. "I designated a warden this morning. Professor Minerva McGonagall, Compact Warden for Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Professor McGonagall has taught in this school for 38 years with a clean Compact record. She holds no ministry appointment that could be used as political leverage against her decisions. She is accountable to the Compact's conditions, which are verifiable, documented, and have stood for over 1,000 years." He waited. Thatch was looking at him with an expression that had shifted from the composed professional neutrality of his opening argument to something more complex, the expression of someone who had prepared for several responses and found that the actual response was not among them. "Furthermore," Harry said, "I have used the Ring's granting authority to issue direct Compact licenses to 5 teachers currently serving at Hogwarts, Professor Sprout, Flitwick, Vector, Sinistra, and Hooch. He'd spent Wednesday evening doing this, one by one, each pulse a different quality, warm, affirming, the ring's version of a handshake rather than a revocation. These licenses operate under the Compact's direct protection, independent of ministry appointment. They cannot be revoked by the ministry, cannot be conditioned, cannot be used as leverage. The teachers holding them are accountable to the Compact's terms and to the warden's oversight. He paused. The deputy director's argument is that the Compact creates unaccountable hereditary authority. The warden designation and the direct license grants address that argument structurally. The authority is distributed, documented, and accountable. What it is not is subject to ministry political management. He looked around the chamber. Which is the thing the Compact's architects specifically designed it to prevent, because political management of educational authority is exactly what causes the situations that required the ring to be used in the first place. He sat down. The chamber was very quiet for 3 seconds. Then it was very loud. Thatch requested a recess, which Fudge granted with the slightly dazed expression of a man whose script had been significantly departed from. The chamber broke into conversation, not the contained murmur of a body being politely restrained, but genuine, engaged argument, members turning to each other in the tears with the animated faces of people wrestling with something real. During the recess, Thatch walked across the central floor to Harry's table. He didn't sit. He stood with his portfolio under his arm and looked at Harry with the full force of that gray, assessing attention, and Harry met it without shifting. The warden designation, Thatch said quietly. That's not something I anticipated. I know, Harry said. McGonagall is, he stopped. She's the right choice. I'll acknowledge that. I know that too. Thatch looked at him for a moment. You're 15 years old, he said. Not as an accusation this time. More as an observation about a fact he was still processing. You've mentioned that, Harry said. The Compact has been dormant for centuries. Yes. And it activated now because the situation required it to activate now. Harry looked at Thatch directly. You think the Compact is a relic? I think it's a mechanism that waits until it's needed. The difference between us is that I think it was needed. And Umbridge, Thatch said. And Snape. And the others. Were violations of exactly the terms the Compact exists to enforce, Harry said. You said the ministry doesn't dispute the blood quill testimonies. Then you agree the violations were real. The Compact provided the mechanism to address them when every other mechanism had failed. Thatch was quiet. Your concern, Harry said, is legitimate. I mean that. An unaccountable hereditary authority over education is a real structural problem. I'm not dismissing it. I addressed it because it needed addressing and because the Compact's own architecture provided the solution. He held Thatch's eyes. But if you're going to tell me that the ministry's accountability is more reliable than the Compact's, I'm going to need you to explain Dolores Umbridge. Who was your appointment? Who violated 14 Compact conditions? And who the ministry was defending with legal injunctions until this morning? Thatch's jaw worked very slightly, the same minimal movement Harry had noticed in Snape. The injunction, Thatch said. I'm going to withdraw it. Harry waited. Not because your legal argument is perfect, Thatch said. It isn't. There are aspects of the Compact's authority that will need to be tested further, challenged further. This isn't over as a legal question. I know it isn't, Harry said. But the warden designation changes the structural argument sufficiently that pursuing the injunction in its current form would be, he paused. Would be arguing against something I don't actually oppose. I don't oppose accountable, distributed educational oversight. I oppose unaccountable centralized authority. He looked at Harry. The warden system, if McGonagall administers it as I believe she will, is not what I was arguing against. No, Harry said. It isn't. Thatch looked at him for one more long moment. The gray eyes had a different quality now, still assessing, but with something in the assessment that wasn't quite respect and was close enough to matter. "You're going to be something remarkable when you're 30, Thatch said quietly. "I'm trying to get to 30 first," Harry said. Something crossed Thatch's face, quick, involuntary, an expression Harry had not expected to see there, the expression of a man who had just been reminded of something he'd been managing not to think about. The war, the prophecy, the thing that everyone in magical Britain was trying to navigate around without looking directly at. He nodded once, picked up his portfolio, and walked back to his table. The chamber reconvened. Thatch rose and formally withdrew the injunction. He did it cleanly, without ceremony, the way someone makes a precise move on a board they're still planning to contest. He noted for the record that the warden designation addressed the structural concerns raised by the injunction and that the ministry reserved the right to bring future motions as the compact's operative authority developed. Fudge looked like a man whose afternoon had not gone as expected. He called for a vote on whether to formally recognize the compact's operative authority, which was either politically brave or politically outmaneuvered. Harry wasn't sure which, but either way the vote happened. The vote was 63 to 24 in favor. The 24 were the Umbridge faction, the pure-blood traditionalists who objected to a half-blood teenager holding ancient covenant authority, and 3 Hufflepuff representatives who genuinely believed in due process and were going to need more time. Harry respected the last 3 and had no particular feelings about the first 21. The gavel came down. The Peverell Compact was formally recognized as operative by the Wisengamot of Magical Britain, for the first time in recorded history. In the gallery, Xenophilius Lovegood made a sound like a man who had just won a very important argument that he'd been having for decades. Rita Skeeter's quick quotes quill was moving so fast it was a blur. Luna was smiling. The aftermath of the chamber had the feeling of all large institutional events once they've ended and people have left the formal space and are standing in corridors, still processing. The plum robes dispersed, conversations fragmented into smaller groups, the official became unofficial. Harry stood in the corridor outside the chamber with Hermione and McGonagall and Ron, who had attended as a witness and who had spent most of the hearing watching the chamber's faces with the focused attention of a chess player reading the board. 63 to 24, Ron said. "That's not bad." "It's 39 votes more than I needed," Harry said. "Still." "The 24. They were always going to be 24, Harry said. "You can't revoke prejudice with a ring." McGonagall was standing with her hands clasped, looking at the middle distance with an expression that had several layers to it, the topmost of which was the controlled composure of someone who has just been handed a significant responsibility in a public setting and is already thinking about what it requires. "Professor," Harry said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The work hasn't started." "It has," Harry said. "You just don't feel it yet." Her expression shifted fractionally. "I will speak to Flitwick tonight," she said. "And Sprout. The direct compact licenses, they need to understand exactly what they hold." "I'll send documentation," Hermione said. "Of course you will," McGonagall said, and it was warm. Flitwick himself appeared at the end of the corridor, having apparently attended as an observer, his small form navigating the dispersing crowd with the quick, precise movement he brought to everything. He reached them slightly out of breath and looked at Harry with enormous bright eyes. "The warden designation," he said. "Article 13. I had read it, years ago, but I never thought," he stopped, gathered himself. "What you did with the license grants this morning, I felt it. When it happened. I was in my office and I felt it." His voice was very controlled and something in it was not controlled at all. "It felt like being chosen," he said. "Like the castle itself chose." "The compact chose," Harry said. "I just agreed with it." Flitwick looked at him for a moment, then looked at the ring on Harry's finger. "The Peverell line," he said quietly, in the tone of someone who has known a great deal of magical history and is still finding something new in it. "I should have expected it would be you." "Why?" Harry asked. "Because," Flitwick said, with the smallest smile, it was always going to be the person nobody managed to manage. They took the flue back to Hogwarts. Harry went last, stepping through the fire in the Ministry atrium and arriving in Dumbledore's office fireplace, which was the designated Hogwarts return point for official Ministry visits, and which meant Harry stepped out of green flame into the office he'd left 5 days ago. Dumbledore was there. He was at his desk again, in the same chair, with the same view of the grounds through the window. He turned when Harry came through and they looked at each other across the office and the distance of everything that had happened in the week between the Sunday morning and this Friday evening. It passed, Dumbledore said. 63-24, Harry said. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Thatch withdrew the injunction. When I told him about the warden designation. Something moved across Dumbledore's face, complex and brief. Minerva, he said quietly. Of course. She was always going to be the one. He looked at his hands. I should have, you couldn't have, Harry said. The warden had to be designated by the ring-bearer. That's the point of it. You couldn't have arranged it. No, Dumbledore said. But I could have, he stopped himself. Many things, he said, and let it stay at that. Harry crossed the room and sat in a chair across the desk, the same chair, the same position as Sunday. The instruments were doing their quiet work around them. Fawkes was watching. The prophecy, Harry said. Now that you've told me, I want to talk about it. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in his expression shifted from the grief composure he'd been maintaining to something more open, more present. Yes, he said. You deserve that. Not today, Harry said. I'm tired and I want dinner. But this week. Dumbledore blinked. Then the corner of his mouth moved. This week, he agreed. And I want it to be an actual conversation, Harry said. Not management. Not information delivered at the speed you've decided I can handle. An actual conversation, where I can ask questions and you answer them honestly even when the honest answer is something you'd rather I didn't have yet. That is, Dumbledore said carefully, a significant shift in how we have previously. I know, Harry said. That's the point. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes were very clear and very old, and in them Harry could see the man who had sealed the chamber in 1964 and the man who had sat in a chair in 1981 and made a decision about a baby's future and the man who had spent 31 years teaching under a covenant he had been violating by degrees, and also, behind all of those, the man who had looked at Harry in the graveyard and showed real grief, real feeling, real care that was not management and not strategy. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. All right. An actual conversation. Harry nodded and stood up. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry stopped. I want to say something that I should have said a long time ago and which I find I cannot improve upon by making it more sophisticated. He paused. I am sorry. For what I withheld. For the management. For the years of keeping you in a position where the most important decisions about your life were being made by someone else using information you weren't allowed to have. His voice was very steady. I told myself it was protection. I have examined that thoroughly this week and I find it was fear wearing protection's clothing. Harry stood with it. I know, he said finally. And I know you meant well. Those things can both be true. Yes, Dumbledore said. They can. After the conversation about the prophecy, Harry said, I want to talk about what comes next. Not the ring, not the compact. Voldemort. The real preparation. He looked at Dumbledore directly. I need to know everything you know. And I need you to teach me, actually teach me, not headmaster me, with the understanding that the goal is for me to be capable, not manageable. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I have no teaching license, he said, and there was something in it that was almost, humor. I know, Harry said. I'll fix that. The great hall at dinner was the loudest Harry had heard it since the first revocation. News traveled at the speed of owl and gossip in Hogwarts, and the combination of both meant that by the time Harry walked in at 6:30, every table had a version of the day's events being discussed simultaneously. The Quibbler's correspondent, apparently a Hufflepuff 7th year with a quick quotes quill and Lovegood's press credentials, had filed a report that was already circulating in handwritten copies. Someone had drawn a cartoon of Thatch withdrawing the injunction that was being passed around the Ravenclaw table and generating significant laughter. Harry sat down. Ron appeared immediately, put a plate of food in front of him, and sat across from him with the expression of someone who had been waiting to debrief. "Tell me everything," he said. Harry told him everything. He got to the part about Thatch withdrawing the injunction and Ron said, "Ha," with the satisfaction of someone whose read of the board had been correct. He got to the vote count and Ron calculated the margin allowed. He got to the flew back to Dumbledore's office and Ron went quiet and listened with more attention than his usual listening, the careful full attention Ron deployed when something mattered. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. "Then, you're going to teach me that almost Latin," he said. "The compact invocation." "It sounds incredible," Ron said. "Like, I know you're using it for very serious purposes, but from the outside it genuinely sounds." "I'll teach you the phrase," Harry said. "You cannot use it. You don't have the ring." "I know I can't use it, I just want to be able to say it." Ron ate a forkful of stew. "Pactum negatum," he said experimentally. "That does sound good." Harry laughed. Actually laughed, the full, genuine laugh that had been rare this year and felt necessary now, a release of something that had been compressed since October. Ron grinned. Hermione, arriving at the table, looked between them. "What?" she said. "Nothing," Harry said, still smiling. "Sit down. Eat something." She sat. She ate. She had her notes out within 30 seconds, which was Hermione asserting that she was capable of doing two things at once, which she always was. Luna sat down at the Gryffindor table without ceremony, which was becoming a habit, and opened the handwritten Quibbler copy. "My father is very pleased," she said. "I know," Harry said. He was audible from the advocates' table. "He gets excited," Luna said. "He says it's the most important story published in the Quibbler's history and he is going to run a commemorative edition with the full compact text." "Tell him that's excellent," Hermione said. "Wide distribution of the text will make it harder for the ministry to reframe the hearing." "I'll tell him you said it was excellent," Luna said. "He'll be very pleased by that specifically." Hermione paused with her quill and looked faintly touched. Later that evening, Harry went to the one place he'd been putting off. Not because he'd been afraid. Because he'd been waiting until the work was done, until the hearing was finished and the vote taken and the conversations had and the dinner eaten. He'd been waiting until he could go without it being about anything except what it actually was. He went down to the sub-basement corridor. The door at the end was still open, it had been open since the first night, and Harry had developed the impression that it was going to stay open now, that the ceiling had been temporary and the opening was permanent. He went down the stairs, feeling the quality of the air change as the older stone enclosed him, the same smell as before, the same ambient weight of centuries. The chamber was the same. The stone table in the center. The lantern he'd left on the edge of the table that first night, still there, unlit now. Harry lit it with a non-verbal lumos and stood in the middle of the room. He took the ring off. This was the thing he hadn't done since putting it on. It had been on his finger for 5 weeks, through the first revocation and the library and Thatch and the Snape revocation and the Quirrell conversation and the Dumbledore conversation and the hearing. He'd slept in it, bathed with it, eaten with it, done his homework with it, and it had been warm and present and alive in the way wands were alive, the way things that had found their correct context were alive. He held it in his palm and looked at it. The black metal. The triangle with the circle and the line. The almost Latin inside the band that he could read fluently now, that had become as natural as English. The ring didn't feel diminished, held instead of worn. It felt the same, warm, settled, complete. Like it was content. Harry turned it in his fingers. Thought about the third brother, the one who'd understood the best thing can't be held. Thought about the dream at the beginning, the crossroads, the three figures, the one who'd looked at him through every version of himself and found them satisfactory. He thought, I'm 15 years old and I have a prophecy and a war and a ring from Merlin and something in the foundations of a school that knows my name. He thought, that's a lot. And then, because he was Harry, he thought, all right then. Let's get on with it. He put the ring back on. The click in the bone of his finger. The warmth. He stood in the chamber for another minute, in the oldest part of the oldest magical school in Britain, in the dark below the place where generations of people had been taught to be extraordinary, and he let it be what it was, the end of one thing and the beginning of another, the specific moment between them. Then he went back up the stairs. The weeks that followed moved differently. The staff adjusted the way institutions adjust when the rules change, some with relief, some with resistance, all with the gradual recognition that the change was real and durable. Flitwick taught his charms classes with a quality of openness that Harry noticed immediately, the same material, the same skill, but with the specific freedom of someone who is no longer performing for an inspector and can simply teach. Sprout's herbology had always been good, the compact license seemed to make her more herself, if that was possible. McGonagall as warden was exactly what Harry had known she would be, precise, rigorous, and deeply fair. She established a review process for teaching licenses that was transparent and documented, built on the compact's conditions but administered with the kind of practical wisdom that made an abstract covenant into a living practice. She interviewed every teacher. She read every student complaint on file, including ones that had been marked reviewed, no action required by previous administration. She acted on 3 of them immediately. Dumbledore, his license revoked, sat in his office and did the administrative work of running the school, which was genuinely necessary and which he did with a focused, unperformed competence that Harry watched with something like admiration. He also began clearing the ground for the conversations about Voldemort, sending Harry books, notes, references, not as managed delivery but as genuine preparation, the academic generosity of a man who had decided to teach honestly even without a license and was doing it anyway. Harry let him. The conversation about the prophecy happened the following Tuesday evening, and it lasted 3 hours, and it was sometimes very hard and sometimes clarifying and sometimes both at once. Dumbledore answered every question honestly, including the ones whose honest answers were things like I don't know and I was wrong about that and, once, I was afraid and I acted from fear and I regret it. Harry left the office at midnight feeling like someone who had been handed a map they should have had years ago and was looking at the terrain it described and thinking, all right. This is the ground. Now I know it. He could work with known ground. Thatch sent a letter on the 21st of November. It was addressed formally, to the ring-bearer and the compact warden jointly, which was itself a kind of acknowledgement of the new structure. It proposed a working group, ministry representatives, compact warden, academic community, to develop a formal framework for how the ministry's educational governance would interact with the compact's authority going forward. It was professional and direct and contained, in the final paragraph, a single sentence that wasn't either of those things. The blood quill testimonies should have been acted upon the first time they were filed. The ministry's failure to do so was a genuine failure of oversight, and I wish to say plainly that your intervention, whatever its legal complexities, addressed a harm that our systems failed to address. That is worth acknowledging. Harry read it twice. Then he wrote back, 3 sentences, agreeing to the working group, suggesting McGonagall as the compact's primary representative, and noting that he thought the acknowledgement was the most important thing in the letter. He meant it. Sirius wrote at the end of November, the longest letter yet, uncoded for once, perhaps because the news was public enough that coding felt unnecessary. I've been talking to Remus about what you've done. He cried, which he will deny. I'm not going to deny that I did too, briefly, before composing myself like the dignified adult I am. What you've built is, James would have called it elegant. He always loved things that solved the whole problem instead of just the immediate one. Your mother would have said you were being unnecessarily dramatic and then admitted the drama was justified. Come visit soon. I mean it. I am in a house with a portrait of my mother and I need someone whose company I actually want. Also Fred and George are very interested in whether compact licenses can be issued for professional enchanting. I've told them no. I need you to also tell them no but with more authority. P.S. Fudge apparently called the vote result a temporary setback in the ministry's educational governance responsibilities. I called it something else but this is a family letter. Harry laughed again, the same full laugh as the dinner table, the laugh that had started coming back. He wrote back immediately, longer than usual, and at the end he wrote, "I'll come visit over Christmas. Save the good chair." December came with snow that fell on the castle from a sky the color of white stone, and Harry walked the corridors in it wearing the ring and carrying the compact and being, in every specific way, exactly who he was. He had potions with Slughorn on a Thursday, the first since Snape's revocation, conducted now with a quality that was simply different in kind, the classroom free of the ambient weight that had been so constant he hadn't fully registered it until it was gone. Slughorn was not a great teacher. He was adequate and enthusiastic and personal in ways that were sometimes uncomfortable. But he was trying honestly, and trying honestly under the compact's terms was enough. Neville produced a perfect draft of Living Death that Thursday. He didn't announce it. He didn't look for approval. He just made it, and corked the vial, and wrote his name on it, and set it on the front table with the clean quiet satisfaction of someone who has known for a long time what they were capable of and has finally been given a room in which to prove it. Harry watched and thought about the smoke at the 20-minute mark, and the way Snape had moved toward Neville's bench with the unhurried step of a predetermined correction, and the silver-blue shimmer of the potion in the instant of the revocation pulse, and felt the specific satisfaction of a right thing having been done. On the last day of term, Harry went down to the sub-basement chamber one more time. He stood at the stone table and looked at the ring on his finger in the lamplight and thought about everything that had happened since the door opened, the revocations, the hearing, the warden, the conversations, the building of something that wasn't finished yet, that wouldn't be finished for a long time, that was in fact only beginning. He thought about Voldemort. About the prophecy. About either must die at the hand of the other. He thought, I know what's coming. I know the ground. I have people who are standing with me who know it too. I'm not managed and I'm not blind and I'm not alone. He thought, that's different from how it was before. That matters. He placed his hand flat on the stone table, the oldest stone in the oldest part of Hogwarts, and felt the ring's warmth move from his finger down through the stone into whatever it was that ran through the foundations of this place, the deep covenant magic that had held the compact for 1,000 years in the dark below the school, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right door to open. He thought, thank you. Whether that was to the compact, or to Ignotus Peverell, or to Merlin, or to the castle itself, or to all the students who'd sat in classrooms and trusted that the person in front of them was there in good faith, he wasn't sure. Maybe all of them. Maybe just the idea of all of them, the long line of people who had believed that teaching mattered enough to bind it in covenant, who had understood that the most important things required the most durable protections. He lifted his hand from the stone. The ring pulsed once, warm and settled, on his finger. Harry picked up his lamp, walked to the stairs, and went back up into the castle. There was a war coming. But tonight, there was dinner, and Ron was saving his seat, and Hermione had somehow obtained the entire archive of Wisengamot proceedings from the 15th century and wanted to show him something she'd found in the margin of the 1432 proceedings that might be relevant to the working group proposal, and Luna was almost certainly going to be at the Gryffindor table again wearing earrings that defied taxonomy, and McGonagall was somewhere in the castle being the warden with the focused competence of someone who had been waiting 38 years to be officially recognized as exactly what she already was. And upstairs, in the headmaster's office, Albus Dumbledore was reading a book and not managing anyone in building, with the patience of a very old, very intelligent man who had finally been honest about his failures, something that was going to matter. Harry walked up through the sub-basement and the dungeons and the main corridors and the staircases, past portraits that watched him and suits of armor that stood their posts and windows that showed the December snow falling soft and constant on Hogwarts grounds. He walked with his hands in his pockets and the ring warm on his finger and the compact against his chest and the castle's familiar weight around him. He walked like someone who knew where he was going. He walked like someone who had chosen it.